Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Relaxing. Tonight we trudge into a frozen Roman world where snow crunches beneath heavy sandals, where pine forests sway under pale moonlight, and where tired legionaries breathe clouds of steam into the bitter night air. You march beside them through icy mountain passes with numb fingers wrapped around a spear shaft that feels colder than riverstone. Somewhere ahead, a horn echoes softly through the white hills, and you already suspect this campaign is going to be absolutely miserable. The Roman Empire may conquer continents, but winter really does not care about imperial confidence. In fact, you probably will not survive this if you forget your cloak, your boots, or basic common sense. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to post your location and local time down below. It is always strangely comforting knowing who else is awake out there in the dark. Now dim the lights. You march north with the Roman army as snowflakes drift lazily through the evening sky. Your breath hangs before your face in pale ribbons while the column slowly climbs into the mountains. Thousands of boots grind over frozen dirt in a rhythm that becomes oddly hypnotic after a while. Clink, crunch, clink, crunch. The legionaries around you barely speak. Cold weather steals conversation from people. Mouths stay hidden beneath wool scarves, and shoulders hunch against the wind blowing down from the peaks ahead. One accepted historical reality is that Roman armies campaigned in winter far more often than people imagine. Popular movies love sunny Mediterranean battlefields full of shining armour and dramatic speeches. Real Roman soldiers often found themselves knee-deep in freezing mud somewhere near the Rhine frontier, wondering why they ever enlisted. You carry almost everything on your back. Shield, cooking pot, bare tunic, wooden stakes for camp defences. Roman soldiers earned the nickname Marius's mules because of the crushing loads they hauled across enormous distances. Right now, though, you would happily trade half your gear for dry socks and a warm loaf of bread. The cold creeps into your hands first. You try blowing into your fingers, but it barely helps. The man beside you mutters that winter in Germania feels like punishment from the gods. Another soldier claims the tribes farther north sleep buried beneath animal skins beside giant dogs the size of donkeys. Nobody really believes him, but honestly, after 3 weeks in this weather, you are prepared to believe almost anything. A strange little detail occasionally appears in Roman accounts from northern campaigns. Some soldiers rubbed goose fat or olive oil onto exposed skin to protect against icy wind. Whether it truly helped remains uncertain, but desperate people experiment with strange ideas very quickly. Modern lip balm suddenly feels like one of humanity's greatest inventions. Historians still argue whether Roman commanders genuinely understood cold weather survival or simply relied on discipline to force men through impossible conditions. The empire began in Mediterranean climates. After all, snowy forests and frozen rivers were not exactly Rome's comfort zone. Ahead, the column slows. You hear curses ripple backward through the line as soldiers nearly collide into one another. A wagon wheel is frozen into a patch of ice beside the narrow mountain road. Mules snort clouds of steam while drivers yank uselessly at leather reins. You stand there shivering, staring into the dark pine woods nearby. Snow rests thick upon the branches. Every now and then, clumps tumble downward with the soft whomps that sound alarmingly like approaching footsteps. That is another miserable thing about winter warfare. Every sound becomes suspicious. A snapping twig, a distant howl, wind scraping branches together. Your imagination grows far too active after sunset. Eventually officers bark commands, and several legionaries shove the wagon loose with groaning effort. The column lurches forward once more. Hours pass slowly. Roman marching songs fade away because nobody has energy left to sing. The only sounds now are boots, creaking leather, and the occasional cough. You feel cold deep inside your chest. Not dramatic freezing to death cold, just a dull, exhausting ache that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. You finally crest a ridge and see campfires flickering far below in the valley. The entire column visibly relaxes. Even experienced soldiers become emotional at the sight of warmth after a winter march. Fire means food, shelter, rest, dry hands, maybe even hot wine if fortune smiles upon you tonight. As you descend into camp, the smell reaches you first. Smoke, wet wool, boiling grain, horse manure. Honestly, Roman military camps probably smelled terrible most of the time, but after marching through snow all day, the scent feels almost comforting. You pass rows of leather tents already dusted white with fresh snowfall. Soldiers crowd round fire pits holding blackened cooking pots over the flames. One man has removed his boots entirely and is inspecting pale toes with genuine concern. Frostbite was a very real danger during northern campaigns, even if Roman writers did not always describe it clearly. A commonly accepted fact among military historians is that Roman camps were astonishingly organised. Even in brutal conditions, ditches, walls, cooking zones, and sleeping areas followed strict layouts. Rome believed discipline could solve nearly everything, cold included. Whether discipline actually warmed anybody is another matter entirely. You crouch beside a fire at last. The heat stings your numb fingers painfully at first. Tiny sparks drift upward into the dark while snow continues falling around the camp in soft silence. Nearby, a veteran explains that you should never warm frozen feet too quickly because it hurts like madness. Judging by his expression, he learned this lesson personally. Someone hands you a cup of heated sour wine mixed with herbs. It tastes awful. It also feels magnificent. The warmth slides slowly through your chest while exhaustion settles over the camp like another blanket of snow. Across the valley, dark mountains loom beneath the stars. Somewhere beyond them wait enemy tribes, frozen rivers, and many more miserable marches. Yet there is also something strangely peaceful here tonight. You sit among tired soldiers listening to crackling fires and distant mule bells. Snowflakes melt softly against your cloak. Steam rises from wet boots lined beside the flames. For a moment, the Roman Empire feels less like a mighty machine of conquest and more like a collection of cold human beings simply trying to survive another winter night. And honestly, say that may be the truest picture of history there is. Morning arrives quietly beneath a pale grey sky. You wake to the sound of coughing legionaries and crackling embers buried under fresh snow. Your blanket feels stiff with frozen moisture, and your nose burns from the cold air sneaking through gaps in the leather tent. Somewhere outside, a mule lets out an offended squeal that who's across the camp. Nobody leaps enthusiastically into a Roman winter morning. You sit up slowly, shoulders aching from yesterday's march, and immediately regret leaving the warmth trapped beneath your blanket. The soldier beside you mutters a prayer to Mercury before pulling on boots that feel like slabs of ice. Outside, campfires already smoke beneath the dawn light. Thin columns of grey drift upward into the silent valley, while soldiers stomp their feet to restore feeling. You notice something immediately. Nearly everybody is wrapped in wool. Heavy wool cloaks, wool tunics, wool scarves, wool blankets. If the Roman Empire had an unofficial mascot, honestly, it might have been an exhausted sheep. One widely accepted historical fact is that wool formed the backbone of Roman military clothing. Wool remained warm even when damp, which mattered enormously during snowy campaigns. Linen felt lighter in warm climates, but winter belonged to wool, thick, scratchy, slightly itchy wool. You pull your cloak tighter around yourself while snow crunches beneath your sandals. The fabric smells faintly of smoke, sweat, and damp sheep. Not exactly luxury, still. It traps precious body heat against your skin surprisingly well. Roman cloaks came in several styles, but soldiers often wore large rectangular cloaks called sagums. They draped heavily over armour and could be wrapped tightly around the body during freezing marches. You quickly discover that a good cloak matters more than almost anything else out here. One veteran demonstrates how to pin the cloak higher near the throat to stop icy wind from creeping downward. Another folds extra cloth beneath his shoulders like crude insulation. Tiny adjustments become survival skills in this environment. The camp slowly stirs alive. Cooking fires hiss softly beneath hanging pots while sleepy men scrape frost from shields. Nearby, an officer curses at a tent rope frozen solid overnight. Somebody else has wrapped strips of wool around his ears until he resembles a very tired turnip. You quietly admire his creativity. A lesser-known little detail from Roman frontier life involves clothing repairs. Soldiers constantly patched cloaks, stitched tiers, and reinforced worn seams themselves. The Empire supplied equipment, yes, but winter punished fabric relentlessly. A ripped cloak in snowy territory could become genuinely dangerous. You kneel beside a fire and stretch chilled hands toward the warmth. Steam rises faintly from your cloak where snowflakes melt into the fibers. The smell reminds you oddly of wet dogs sleeping beside fireplaces. Nearby, two soldiers debate whether wearing multiple thin tunics works better than one thick layer. Surprisingly modern conversation, really. Human beings have apparently argued about winter clothing forever. One of them claims soldiers stationed in Britain stuffed dry grass beneath tunics for insulation during severe cold. Historians still debate whether such improvisations were widespread or simply isolated frontier tricks exaggerated in storytelling. Still, after enough freezing nights, stuffing yourself with grass probably begins sounding reasonable. Breakfast arrives in wooden bowls. Hoppy barley porridge. Not glamorous, not delicious, but wonderfully warm. You cradle the bowl carefully, letting heat soak into your hands before taking the first bite. Around you, men eat silently while snowflakes drift lazily across camp. Some soldiers keep cloaks wrapped tightly even while eating. Others stand near fires, turning slowly like roasting chickens to warm every side of themselves evenly. A young recruit nearby asks whether winters always feel this bad. Nobody answers immediately. Finally, an older legionary laughs softly and says, "No, sometimes they are worse." Comforting. You notice many soldiers rubbing oil into exposed skin before preparing for the next march. Olive oil remained a prized Roman staple even far from Italy. Besides cooking and bathing, people sometimes used it against dry, cracking skin caused by bitter cold. A few scholars propose that Roman soldiers occasionally mixed oil with ashes or animal fat to create primitive protective salves. Whether these mixtures truly worked remains uncertain, though one suspects anything greasy felt better than icy wind cutting directly across bare cheeks. Soon horns echo through camp. Time to march again! You gather your gear reluctantly while the snow squeaks beneath your boots. The sky hangs low and colourless overhead. Somewhere beyond the valley, the road continues north through forests already buried beneath winter. The column forms carefully. You immediately notice another useful trick among experienced soldiers. Cloaks are wrapped tightly before marching but loosen slightly once movement warms the body. Sweat becomes dangerous in cold weather. Damp clothing steals heat brutally once you stop moving. Roman soldiers may not have understood modern thermodynamics, but centuries of military experience taught practical lessons quickly. As the march resumes, you study the clothing around you more carefully. Scarves wrapped over mouths, wool caps beneath helmets, extra tunics scavenged from trade posts, leather gloves with missing fingertips for better grip. Nothing matches perfectly. Roman armies looked less polished on campaign than statues suggest. Real soldiers improvised constantly. The road narrows as pine forests close around the column. Snow muffles sound so completely that the army seems almost ghostly now. Even thousands of marching men produce only a soft crunching rhythm beneath the trees. Cold air slips beneath your cloak occasionally, raising sharp goosebumps along your neck. You pull the wool tighter instinctively. The fabric scratches slightly against your chin, but you no longer care. Warmth outranks comfort very quickly. A curious fringe story sometimes appears in discussions of Roman winter campaigns. Some ancient writers claimed northern tribes laughed at Romans for dressing too lightly in cold climates. According to these accounts, frontier peoples occasionally wore fur trousers and layered animal skins while legionaries stubbornly clung to Mediterranean traditions. Whether this criticism was fair remains uncertain. Roman armies adapted more than stereotypes suggest. Still, there may have been awkward moments when heavily cloaked legionaries realized local shepherds understood snow far better than imperial officers did. Hours later, snow begins falling harder. Tiny flakes gather along your shoulders and helmet rim. The world turns quiet and white around the marching column. Ahead, standards sway gently through the storm like dark shadows. You feel the warmth trapped beneath your wool cloak holding steady despite the freezing air outside. Not perfect warmth. Never perfect, but enough. Enough to keep marching. Enough to survive another day in the Empire's frozen northern edge. And for Roman soldiers, that often counted as victory. The road disappears beneath frozen mud sometime around midday. At first it merely feels slippery beneath your boots, but soon the entire marching column slows into an awkward shuffle through grey slush. Snowmelt mixes with churned dirt until the ground resembles cold porridge. Every step produces a wet sucking sound that gradually drives everyone insane. You glance downward constantly now, because your feet have become the centre of your universe. Roman soldiers marched extraordinary distances, sometimes more than 20 miles a day carrying heavy equipment. One reliable historical detail repeated across military studies is that healthy feet determined whether an army survived. Not bravery, not patriotism, feet. And at the moment, yours feel terrible. Cold water seeps slowly through the leather of your boots while icy mud cakes around the hobnails beneath the soles. You flex your toes repeatedly just to reassure yourself they still function. Ahead, a soldier suddenly stumbles sideways with a curse. 2 others grab him before he falls face first into slush. Nobody laughs. Falling means wet clothing. Wet clothing means misery. You continue trudging forward through the white wilderness while snowflakes gather across shields and helmets. The forest around the column looks endless now. Dark trunks rise through drifting fog like silent pillars in some frozen temple. The sound of marching changes too. Yesterday brought crisp, crunching snow. Today sounds wetter. Wetter. Squishing boots. Splashing puddles, metal rattling softly against soaked leather straps. The cold feels different as well. Less sharp, perhaps, but somehow more exhausting. Dampness drains energy in ways dry snow never quite manages. A veteran beside you notices your discomfort and points toward your boots. Keep moving your toes, he mutters. If they stop hurting, worry. Wonderful advice. Roman military boots called caligae usually work brilliantly in warmer climates. They featured thick leather soles reinforced with iron hobnails for durability and grip. The open design allowed ventilation during hot Mediterranean campaigns. Unfortunately, ventilation becomes less exciting when marching through freezing mud in Germania. Scholars continue debating how effectively standard Roman footwear handled severe winter weather. Some evidence suggests soldiers adapted by wrapping cloth around feet or modifying boots with extra leather coverings. Archaeological discoveries near colder frontiers hint at practical improvisation rather than rigid uniformity. Honestly, the empire probably survived because ordinary soldiers constantly ignored official perfection. You notice many men in the column have tied scraps of wool around their ankles beneath the boots. Others stuff bits of animal fur inside for insulation. One particularly inventive legionary appears to have lined his footwear with dry moss. He claims it works wonderfully. He also smells vaguely like a swamp. Still, nobody judges innovation during a snowstorm. Hours pass slowly. Your shoulders ache beneath the weight of your pack while numb wind brushes across your cheeks. Somewhere ahead, Officers shout for tighter formation as the road narrows between icy hills. The column bends through the landscape like a dark serpent disappearing into snowfall. You try not to think about your feet. This proves impossible. Eventually the army halts beside a partially frozen stream. Soldiers immediately scatter toward patches of exposed rock and fallen logs, desperate of a brief rest. You collapse onto your pack with a groan while carefully removing one boot. Steam rises faintly from your damp sock. The smell is deeply upsetting. Ancient armies truly lacked many modern luxuries. Indoor heating, waterproof fabric, spare sneakers, tiny packets of foot powder. Human civilization has achieved remarkable things, honestly. You inspect your pale, wrinkled toes anxiously. Nearby, several veterans do exactly the same thing. One man massages his feet vigorously to restore circulation. Another curses because his smallest toe has turned suspiciously white. A lesser-known tidbit from Roman frontier archaeology involves footwear repairs. Excavations near Hadrian's Wall uncovered enormous quantities of worn shoes discarded by soldiers and civilians alike. Some had multiple patches and repaired soles, suggesting people squeezed every possible mile from them before giving up. Makes sense? When your life depends on your boots, you do not casually throw them away. The break ends too quickly. Soon the column resumes marching through thickening snowfall. Your damp boots squelch unpleasantly with each step now, but at least movement restores a little warmth. Standing still remains the true enemy. You pass abandoned farmhouses occasionally. Thin smoke curls from distant chimneys while where locals watch silently from behind wooden fences. Children stare wide-eyed at the endless line of armoured strangers moving through the storm. You wonder what Roman soldiers look like to them. Invaders, protectors, cold, exhausted men with terrible posture. Probably all three. By late afternoon, the weather worsens dramatically. Wind sweeps across the hills, carrying icy needles of snow that sting exposed skin. Cloaks whip violently against armour, while soldiers lower their heads and keep marching. Conversation disappears completely now. Breathing itself requires concentration. The cold reaches your feet again despite constant movement. That deep aching numbness still returns. A strange fringe account survives from later Roman periods, claiming some soldiers rubbed vinegar onto their feet before marches to toughen the skin. Whether this actually helped or merely gave legionaries cold vinegar feet remains unclear. Ancient medicine produced many ambitious theories. Historians still debate whether Roman armies suffered more casualties from exposure and illness during winter campaigns than from direct combat. Ancient sources rarely describe ordinary suffering in detail. Generals preferred glorious victories over discussions about trench foot, yet you can feel the truth beneath your boots right now. Cold wages its own slow war. At last, horns sound through the blizzard ahead. Camp. The word spreads backward almost magically. Tired men straighten slightly despite exhaustion. You glimpse smoke rising beyond a ridge and suddenly realize how badly you want warmth. You descend into camp at twilight while snow swirls around rows of half-erected tents. Fires already crackle between muddy pathways. Soldiers crowd toward them immediately like weary moths. The first thing you do is remove your boots. Pain floods your toes as warmth slowly returns. It feels like hundreds of tiny needles stabbing your skin. Nearby, a veteran laughs softly at your expression. Means they still work, he says. Comforting once again, you stretch damp socks beside the fire while steam rises into the freezing air. Around you, exhausted legionaries do exactly the same thing, bare feet everywhere. Honestly, the mighty Roman army looks far less intimidating during sock-drying hour. Still, there is comfort in shared misery. The fire crackles warmly. Snow falls softly beyond the camp, and for tonight at least, your feet remain alive enough to carry you onward tomorrow. Night settles heavily across the valley. The snowstorm from earlier has weakened into a lazy drifting curtain, and now the Roman camp glows softly beneath the darkness like a scattered collection of orange stars. Smoke hangs low between the tents. Somewhere nearby, somebody snores loudly enough to frighten wildlife. You sit close to the fire with your cloak wrapped tightly around your knees. Every inch of exposed skin still remembers the march. The warmth reaches your face first, then slowly creeps into your hands. Your boots dry beside the flames while damp steam curls upward into the cold air. Around you, legionaries perform the evening ritual of survival. Not battle preparation, not heroic speeches, just warmth. One detail confirmed by countless archaeological finds is how central campfires were to Roman military life, especially on northern frontiers. Fire provided heat, light, cooking, drying, morale, and probably the closest thing soldiers had to emotional comfort after brutal marches. And tonight, you understand why, without the fire, this valley would feel unbearable. A young recruit struggles beside a pile of damp pine branches nearby. He blows desperately at the weak sparks while smoke pours directly into his face. Several veterans watch his efforts with complete indifference for nearly a minute before finally intervening. One older soldier kneels beside him and calmly rearranges the wood. "Dry pieces underneath," he mutters. "Wet ones later." Within moments, flames catch properly. The recruit looks genuinely amazed, as if witnessing sacred magic. To be fair, when you are freezing, fire does begin to feel supernatural. The smell of burning pine drifts through camp now. Sharp, resinous, comforting. It mixes with boiling barley, wet leather, and wood smoke until the entire camp carries its own distinct winter scent. You notice many fires are built inside shallow pits lined with stones. Others are shielded with pieces of wood or stacked earth to block the wind. Roman soldiers became surprisingly resourceful when cold weather threatened their sleep. Some surviving military manuals hint at the extraordinary importance of camp construction in difficult climates. Roman armies did not simply collapse beside roads and hope for the best. Even exhausted troops dug trenches, raised barriers, and organized cooking zones before resting. Honestly, it sounds exhausting. March 20 miles through snow. Then build a fortified village. Then maybe eat soup if nobody attacks. Ancient soldiers truly lived through levels of inconvenience modern people would classify as emotional warfare. You stretch your hands closer to the flames carefully. Too close, and the heat becomes painful against frozen skin. Tiny cracks have appeared across your knuckles or from cold and dryness. Nearly everyone around the fire has similar hands now. A curious frontier rumor circulates through camp tonight. One soldier claims northern tribes sometimes carried hot stones wrapped in cloth beneath blankets during winter travel. Another insists certain mountain villages slept beside heated bricks inside wooden beds. Whether these stories were accurate or merely the product of tired imaginations remains difficult to say. Ancient travelers loved exaggeration almost as much as modern internet commenters. Still, the idea of carrying portable warmth sounds genius right now. Snow continues falling softly beyond the firelight. You stare out into the darkness where rows of tents fade into shadow. Guards patrol slowly between them with spears tucked beneath heavy cloaks. Their boots crunch rhythmically through snow while distant mule bells chime somewhere near the supply wagons. Everything feels quieter at night in winter camps. Even conversation lowers itself naturally. One seasoned centurion nearby begins explaining how dangerous cold camps become without proper firewood. During difficult campaigns, soldiers sometimes stripped nearby forests completely bare within days. Entire hillsides vanished into smoke and ash simply because thousands of freezing humans needed warmth. Researchers continue discussing how much environmental damage Roman armies caused during extended frontier occupations. Huge camps consumed astonishing amounts of timber for fires, defences, workshops, and construction. Empire, it turns out, burns a lot of wood. You accept a wooden bowl of stew from another soldier. The contents appear mysterious. Barley, certainly. Perhaps onions? Possibly meat. Hopefully meat. The warmth matters more than the ingredients. Steam fogs your face while you eat slowly beside the crackling flames. Across the camp, laughter suddenly erupts near another fire pit. Somebody must be telling stories now. Tired armies always drift towards storytelling after dark, probably because stories distract people from cold toes. One fringe anecdote preserved in Roman writings describes soldiers singing loudly around winter fires to maintain morale during terrifying campaigns. You imagine exhausted legionaries wrapped in smoky cloaks, trying to outshout the wind beyond camp walls. There is something deeply human about that image. No glorious marble statues, no shining emperors, just cold people needing comfort. A gust of wind suddenly sweeps across camp, scattering sparks upward into the dark sky. Several soldiers pull cloaks tighter immediately. One man checks the ropes securing nearby tents. Another quietly feeds extra branches into the fire without being asked. Nobody fully trusts winter weather. You glance toward the mountains surrounding the valley. Their snowy slopes gleam faintly beneath moonlight now. Somewhere beyond them lie enemy settlements, frozen roads, and more exhausting marches waiting for the army tomorrow. But tonight feels strangely safe. The fire creates a small world of warmth against the endless cold outside. Faces glow orange in the flickering light. Shadows move across helmets hanging beside tents. Snowflakes drift lazily through smoke like pale floating ash. A practical fact often overlooked in discussions of Roman warfare is how survival itself became a daily military skill. Before battle even began, soldiers had to avoid sickness, exposure, starvation, exhaustion, and injury from the environment around them. Winter punished mistakes ruthlessly. You hear somebody quietly humming beside the flames. Another soldier rubs his hands together slowly while staring into the fire with completely exhausted eyes. Nearby, a pair of recruits argue over whose turn it is to gather more wood. Neither wants to leave the warmth. Entire civilizations have probably collapsed over similar arguments. Eventually you lean backward against your pack and let the heat wash across your face. The crackling fire softens into a steady, comforting rhythm. Smoke drifts upward through the snowy darkness while the camp settles gradually towards sleep. Tomorrow will bring more marching, more cold roads, more frozen mornings, but for now, beneath the snowy pines, the fire holds the darkness away a little longer. And that is enough. The wind begins shaking the tent sometime after midnight. You wake slowly beneath heavy blankets as leather walls snap and flutter around you like sails caught in a storm. Snow rattles softly against the stretched hide overhead. Somewhere outside, a guard coughs into the darkness. Inside the tent, the air feels damp and strangely warm at the same time. Not comfortable warm. Warm, just slightly less freezing than outside. You lie still for a moment listening to the sounds of sleeping soldiers around you. Quiet snoring, rustling wool. Somebody grinding their teeth. The entire tent smells of smoke, wet leather, tired bodies, and muddy boots drying near the entrance. Roman military life involved very little personal space. That may be the understatement of the century. You shift carefully on your bedding, trying not to elbow the legionary sleeping beside you. The ground beneath the blankets remains hard despite layers of straw and cloak spread across it. Your hips ache, your shoulders ache. Honestly, parts of your body ache that you did not previously realize existed. Outside, another gust sweeps across camp. The tent ropes creak sharply. You suddenly appreciate how vulnerable winter armies truly were. One severe storm could destroy shelter, soak supplies, extinguish fires, and freeze exhausted men before sunrise. Archaeologists studying Roman frontier camps have uncovered evidence that soldiers often adapted tent arrangements during harsh seasons in colder regions. Temporary shelters sometimes became more heavily reinforced with extra hides, turf walls, or timber supports. Flexibility mattered more than parade ground perfection once snow entered the picture. You pull your wool blanket tighter around your shoulders and try to settle again. The soldier beside you mutters something unintelligible in his sleep. Another snores loudly from the far side of the tent. A third keeps twitching every few minutes like he's still marching in dreams. You understand the feeling. Hours of marching through snow linger inside the body long after stopping. The tent itself feels crowded but oddly reassuring. Human warmth gathers inside small spaces remarkably quickly, with 6 or 8 men sharing the shelter. The interior temperature rises enough to matter. A practical truth of the ancient campaigning was that soldiers survived cold partly by simply clustering together. Not glamorous, not heroic, just warm. Outside, winter whistles through the valley. Inside, breathing fills the darkness softly. One unusual story from Roman military records mentioned soldiers in northern provinces lining tent floors with pine branches for extra insulation. The fragrant needles supposedly reduced dampness and softened the ground slightly. Whether every legion practiced this remains uncertain, though anyone sleeping on frozen dirt would probably welcome a mattress made from almost anything. You notice faint traces of pine scent beneath the stronger smell surrounding you now, so perhaps there was something to it. A sudden clatter outside startles the entire tent awake. Several men curse immediately while somebody grabs for a dagger in confusion. After a tense moment, laughter drifts through the camp beyond the leather walls. Apparently a mule escaped its tether. The relief inside the tent feels immediate. Winter nights sharpen nerves badly. Darkness plus snow plus exhaustion equals an imagination that assumes disaster constantly. Every strange sound becomes suspicious after midnight. You hear the mule still protesting somewhere outside. Honestly, it sounds offended by existence itself. One commonly accepted fact about Roman marching camps is how standardized their layout remained even during difficult weather. Tents were arranged methodically in organized rows with designated spaces for officers, animals, supplies, and cooking fires. This order created familiarity for soldiers moving constantly through unfamiliar territory. In other words, even half-frozen legionaries still appreciated a good organizational chart. You close your eyes again while the storm continues outside. The leather roof above you ripples softly with each gust. Tiny flakes of snow occasionally slip through seams and melt coldly against your cloak. Nearby, someone quietly unwraps stored bread and begins chewing in the darkness. Night hunger apparently transcends centuries. You eventually drift into shallow sleep filled with strange dreams about endless snowy roads. When you wake again before dawn, the tent feels colder. Fires outside must have burned low overnight. Pale grey light seeps faintly through the leather walls. Morning already! Nobody seems happy about this development. The men around you rise solely beneath blankets and cloaks, groaning softly while pulling on stiff boots. Condensation from breathing has dampened parts of the tent interior. One soldier brushes frost directly from his blanket with visible irritation. Winter camping required constant attention to moisture. Once bedding became soaked or frozen, warmth vanished rapidly. Some historians believe Roman armies rotated blankets and cloaks near fires whenever possible, simply to keep essential fabrics dry enough for survival. You crawl toward the entrance flap reluctantly. Cold air immediately punches you in the face. Outside! The camp lies beneath fresh snow, sparkling faintly in early dawn light. Thin smoke rises from newly relit fires, while sleepy legionaries emerge from tents looking deeply betrayed by the universe. The valley appears beautiful in that dangerous winter way, silent trees coated white. Frozen ground gleaming silver, mountains fading into pale mist, and absolutely nowhere warm enough to justify military expansion. You stamp your boots beside a struggling fire while another soldier pours melted snow into a cooking pot. Nearby, officers inspect tents for damage from the storm. A collapsed shelter farther down the camp already has several men rebuilding it while muttering curses through frozen breath. Roman tents themselves were usually made from leather rather than woven cloth. This offered durability and some resistance against weather. Though leather became stiff and awkward in extreme cold, keeping shelters secure during winter storms demanded constant effort. A lesser-known rumour from frontier postings claimed experienced soldiers preferred sleeping near the centre of tents because edge positions collected more condensation and cold drafts. Whether scientifically accurate or not, every army everywhere seems to develop unofficial sleeping politics. You can already imagine the arguments. As dawn brightens slowly across the valley, the camp begins preparing for another march. Snow crunches beneath sandals, horses snort steam into the icy air, fires hiss softly beneath hanging kettles, and behind you, rows of battered leather tents stand stubbornly against the frozen wilderness. Temporary homes for tired soldiers trying to stay warm at the edge of the Roman world. By the third week of marching north, you begin understanding why Roman soldiers loved mules. Not admired them politely. Loved them. The animals carry tents, tools, grain sacks, spare weapons, cooking equipment, and sometimes exhausted men who simply cannot continue another step through snow. Without pack animals, the entire army would slow into disaster remarkably fast. Tonight, though, the mules provide something even more valuable. Heat. You arrive at camp just after sunset beneath a sky the colour of cold iron. Snow still clings to your cloak from the march, and your legs ache so deeply that sitting down feels like a religious experience. The camp settles beside a narrow ridge lined with pine trees. Fires are already burning between the tents, but the wind keeps sweeping smoke directly into everyone's eyes. Soldiers curse softly while shielding flames with shields and supply crates. Nearby, the animal lines stretch across the snowy slope. Dozens upon dozens of mules and horses stand bundled together beneath blankets and harnesses. Their breath rises in thick white clouds. Leather straps creak softly while hooves stamp impatiently against frozen ground. And despite the smell, the area feels noticeably warmer. You wander closer, carrying an armful of firewood. Immediately, warmth radiates from the tightly grouped animals into the freezing evening air. Not dramatic warmth, nothing tropical, but enough to matter, enough that several soldiers have clearly noticed the same thing. One veteran already sits beside a mule with his cloak wrapped around both of them like unlikely friends sharing a miserable camping trip. The mule appears deeply unimpressed. Evidence from Roman military sites shows how heavily armies depended on animals during campaigns. Mules in particular became essential because they handled rough terrain better than wagons and required less care than horses. Some commanders considered them more reliable than recruits, which honestly feels believable. You lower yourself beside a nearby pack animal and stretch tired hands toward its shaggy neck. Heat seeps slowly through the coarse fur. The mule flicks one ear backward, but otherwise tolerates your presence. Apparently you have become part of the herd now. The smell surrounding the animal lines is intense. Wet fur, dung, leather, steaming breath, hay beginning to rot beneath snow. Yet after weeks on campaign, the scent carries an odd familiarity. Human beings adapt disturbingly fast to military environments. A soldier nearby claims cavalrymen sometimes slept beside horses during severe winter storms. Another insists some frontier outposts built partial shelters specifically to trap animal heat near sleeping quarters. Researchers remain divided on how commonly Roman troops intentionally use livestock warmth during cold weather encampments. Ancient writers rarely described ordinary survival habits in detail. Generals preferred discussing victories, rather than explaining that their armies occasionally cuddled mules for insulation. History loses many important details that way. You rub your hands together while watching stable attendants move through the lines checking harnesses. The animals themselves seem calmer tonight than the soldiers. They lower their heads against the wind and simply endure the weather with ancient patience. Honestly, the mules might be emotionally stronger than everyone else here. One narrow historical point often overlooked involves the sheer logistical challenge of feeding animals during winter campaigns. Roman armies required enormous amounts of grain and fodder daily. Snow-covered roads complicated everything. Hungry animals weakened quickly, and weakened animals slowed armies. Cold attacked empires through stomachs as often as battlefields. You notice several soldiers brushing snow from the backs of pack animals before covering them with thick blankets. Others inspect hooves carefully for ice build-up. Even hardened legionaries understood that protecting animals meant protecting themselves. No mule, no supplies, no firewood, no warm shoe food, no survival. Nearby, one horse suddenly sneezes directly into a recruit's face. The recruit reacts as though personally betrayed by civilization. Several older soldiers laugh into their cups of heated wine. The camp grows darker as night settles fully over the ridge. Fires flicker beneath drifting snow while guards begin evening patrols. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howl faintly through the forest. The animals react immediately. Heads rise, ears twitch. Harness janses or planes rattle softly. You feel the nervous energy ripple across the line. One obscure story from the northern provinces describes Roman soldiers hanging small bells near animal enclosures at night. The sound supposedly warned camps if predators or raiders disturbed the herd after dark. Whether this happened regularly remains uncertain, but listening to wolves in snowy forests probably encouraged creative security ideas. You pull your cloak tighter while snowflakes drift lazily onto the mule beside you. The animal exhales heavily through its nose, sending warm vapour swirling through the cold air. For a moment, everything becomes strangely peaceful. No marching, no shouted orders, just quiet breathing beneath falling snow. A practical reality acknowledged by many modern historians is that Roman armies succeeded partly because they adapted relentlessly to local conditions. Frontier warfare forced soldiers to learn from experience, from enemies, and from the environment itself. Sometimes adaptation meant stronger fortifications, sometimes warmer clothing, and occasionally it meant realizing a mule gives off excellent body heat during blizzards. You finally rise and carry the remaining firewood back toward your tent. The camp glows softly behind curtains of snow now. Soldiers huddle beside flames eating stew from wooden bowls. Armour hangs drying beside fires. Wet boots line pathways like abandoned turtles. The mighty Roman war machine continues looking surprisingly exhausted. Inside your tent, the air feels marginally warmer than yesterday. Several men already lie wrapped in blankets while another quietly repairs a torn glove near the lantern light. You settle onto your bedding with a sigh. Outside, the animals continue shifting and breathing through the snowy darkness. Their sounds drift softly through camp all night long, hooves scraping frozen earth, harness buckles clinking gently, the occasional irritated mule complaining to the universe. Oddly comforting sounds. As your eyes slowly close, you realize warmth on campaign rarely comes from grand solutions. Usually it arrives in small forms. A fire, a wool blanket, a cup of hot wine, the shoulder of another exhausted soldier, or the patient body heat of a very overworked mule standing quietly beneath the snow. Before sunrise, the camp smells of smoke and boiling grain. You wake to darkness broken only by scattered firelight glowing through the haws. Somewhere outside, cooks are already moving between kettles, while sleepy soldiers stumble through snow carrying wooden bowls. The air bites sharply at your face the moment you crawl from beneath your blankets. Your stomach immediately reminds you that yesterday's march happened. The cold makes hunger feel heavier somehow, more serious. You cannot simply ignore it. Your body burns through warmth during winter nights, and by dawn every soldier in camp wants something hot inside his stomach before another frozen march begins. You step carefully through slushy pathways between tents, while the eastern sky slowly lightens from black to deep blue. Fires crackle low beneath hanging pots, smoke drifts lazily across camp, carrying the comforting scent of cooked barley and onions. Honestly, it smells better than many modern airport food courts. You join the growing line near one of the cooking fires. Soldiers stand wrapped in cloaks with bowls tucked beneath their arms, shoulders hunched against the morning wind. Oh. Nobody speaks much. Dawn cold has a way of silencing people. One thing historians know with confidence is that Roman armies depended heavily on grain rations. Wheat and barley formed the backbone of military nutrition across the empire. Soldiers often prepared porridge, coarse bread, or thick soups that could be cooked relatively quickly even during difficult campaigns. Not glamorous cuisine, but reliable. And reliability becomes beautiful when snows fall in sideways. A cook finally slaps a ladle full of steaming barley porridge into your bowl. Steam curls upward into the freezing air while you carry it toward the nearest fire, like a man protecting sacred treasure. The first bite nearly burns your tongue. Magnificent. Warm food changes everything out here. You feel life returning slowly to your fingers while heat spreads downward through your chest. Around the fire, other legionaries eat with identical expressions of exhausted gratitude. One man closes his eyes after tasting hot broth as though experiencing divine revelation. Another quietly steals an extra onion when the cook looks away. Ancient military discipline apparently had limits. A detail that surprises many modern readers is how much Roman soldiers cooked for themselves. Armies carried grain, but individuals or small groups often prepared meals personally. Campaign life involved grinding flour, tending ferties, boiling stews, and improvising with whatever supplies remained available. So yes, the legendary Roman war machine also included a great deal of arguing over soup. You hold your bowl carefully near the flames while snowflakes drift through camp. Nearby, several men warm hard bread beside the fire before eating it. One recruit drops his breakfast directly into the mud and looks moments away from tears. A veteran silently hands him half a loaf without comment. Small kindnesses matter more in winter. One curious account from the frontier regions mentions soldiers heating sour wine mixed with herbs during cold campaigns. The drink probably tasted strange by modern standards, but warm liquids became psychologically important during freezing weather. Some mixtures may even have included honey when supplies allowed. You remember last week's awful heated wine and suddenly miss it deeply. Funny how standards collapse during military life. Across camp, mule handlers distribute feed while cavalrymen rub down horses before sunrise. The entire army wakes gradually through layers of steam, smoke, and frost. Someone begins coughing violently nearby. That sound appears more frequently lately. Cold weather sickness spread easily through crowded camps, especially when damp clothing and exhaustion weakened soldiers over long marches. Roman military doctors understood surprisingly practical concepts about rest, warmth, and diet, even if ancient medicine also wandered occasionally into complete nonsense. One physician reportedly recommended owl eggs for certain illnesses. Human history contains many questionable breakfast decisions. You scrape the last of the porridge from your bowl and immediately wish there were more. Marching in winter consumes energy relentlessly. Your body craves warmth constantly, and food becomes fuel in the most literal sense imaginable. Near the fires, several soldiers now hold strips of meat over glowing embers. The smell drifts temptingly through salted pork perhaps, maybe sausage, hard to tell beneath the smoke. Researchers continue discussing how varied Roman military diets became along different frontiers. Supplies changed depending on local trade, climate, and available livestock. Troops in snowy northern provinces likely adapted their eating habits considerably compared to soldiers stationed near the Mediterranean coast. In other words, winter probably encouraged creative cooking or desperate cooking. Sometimes those become identical. The sky brightens gradually overhead while camp preparations intensify. Officers move between tents shouting orders. Armor clinks softly. Fires flare higher as cooks boil additional kettles for the remaining troops. You notice many soldiers warming hands directly over steam rising from food pots. Efficient thinking. A lesser-known little habit appears among several veterans nearby. Before marching, they tuck bits of warm bread or roasted grain inside their cloaks to keep food from freezing too quickly during the day. One man even carries hot stones wrapped in cloth beside his rations. You suddenly remember that rumour from earlier about northern villagers sleeping with heated stones. Perhaps strange ideas survive because they actually work. The wind sharpens suddenly across the valley. Everyone near the fire instinctively shifts closer together. You watch steam rise from dozens of bowls while snow crunches beneath boots all around camp. It occurs to you that breakfast may have been one of the few predictable comforts Roman soldiers could depend upon during winter campaigns. Not safety, not victory. Just warm food before dawn, and perhaps that was enough. A senior centurion nearby tears apart a loaf of bread while casually describing a previous campaign where entire supply wagons froze beside a river crossing. Men survived partly by boiling strips of leather to make broth until fresh grain arrived. You glance suspiciously at your breakfast leftovers now. The centurion notices and laughs. "Relax," he says. "Today's stew contained real food." Reassuring, soon the horns sound again across camp. Time to march. Soldiers groan softly while gathering shields and packs. Fires begin dying down beneath the pale morning sky. Yet for a brief hour before sunrise, surrounded by smoke and warmth and steaming bowls, the frozen Roman army felt almost comfortable. Almost. By midday, your armor feels colder than the snow itself. The marching column winds through narrow forest trails where sunlight barely reaches the ground. Frost clings to pine branches overhead, and every breath burns slightly inside your chest. Beneath your cloak, metal presses against your body with the relentless chill. Roman armor looks magnificent in statues. Statues rarely mention how freezing it becomes during winter campaigns. You adjust the leather straps beneath your shoulder plates while trudging through packed snow. The movement sends a wave of icy metal against your tunic, instantly unpleasant. Around you, legionaries constantly tug at cloaks, reposition belts, and shift equipment in small attempts to stay comfortable. Nobody ever truly succeeds. Winter simply negotiates degrees of suffering. A firmly established point among military historians is that Roman soldiers wore layered clothing beneath armor whenever conditions allowed. Tunics, padded garments, scarves, and cloaks all helped reduce friction and preserve warmth under metal equipment. Without layers, armor became almost unbearable in cold weather. You glance at the man beside you whose chainmail glitters faintly beneath his cloak. Tiny icicles hang from the lower rings where melted snow refroze overnight. He notices you staring and mutters, "Feels exactly as pleasant as it looks." Noted. Your own armor presses heavily against tired shoulders while the column continues northward. Leather straps creak softly with every step. The smell surrounding the marching soldiers now blends wool, sweat, smoke, and cold iron into something unmistakably military. There is also the constant sound, clinking buckles, rattling mail, metal scraping shields. The Roman army announces itself even in snowstorms. You pull your cloak tighter, but cold still sneaks beneath the armor whenever the wind changes direction. The metal seems to absorb winter itself and press it directly into your bones. One forgotten little anecdote survives from northern frontier camps describing soldiers warming pieces of armor beside fires before dawn marches. Whether this practice happened regularly remains difficult to prove, though anyone forced to wear frozen metal at sunrise would likely consider it genius. You certainly would. The road ahead slopes gradually upward through dark forest. Snow muffles most sound beyond the marching column, creating a strange dreamlike atmosphere. Standards drift through the trees ahead like red ghosts moving across white hills. A cavalry patrol rides past slowly, horses breathing clouds into the cold air. The riders wear heavier cloaks than the infantry and look marginally less miserable. Marginally, you notice many soldiers have wrapped scraps of cloth around exposed metal parts near wrists and shoulders. Small modifications like these probably developed naturally over years of frontier service. Armies adapt because discomfort eventually forces creativity. Some modern scholars believe Roman troops stationed long-term in colder provinces increasingly borrowed practical clothing ideas from local populations. Trousers, heavier furs, and layered winter garments became more common near northern borders despite traditional Roman attitudes favouring Mediterranean styles. Empire changes people, weather changes them faster. A recruit several rows ahead suddenly yelps after touching bare metal with exposed fingers. The entire line chuckles quietly while he shakes his hand furiously. Cold metal teaches lessons quickly. You remember touching your shield rim earlier without gloves and immediately regretting it. The sensation lingers unpleasantly in memory even now. Around midday, the army halts briefly beside a frozen stream. Soldiers lower packs with grateful sighs while officers inspect the route ahead. You immediately kneel beside a small fire being hastily assembled from damp branches and bits of pine bark. Several men hold pieces of armour toward the flames carefully, not close enough to damage leather, just enough to steal back some warmth. The smell of heated metal mixes strangely with wood smoke. Nearby, one veteran explains that sleeping in armour during winter could become dangerous because trapped moisture froze overnight against the body. Better to remove it near fires whenever possible. Of course, removing armour also risked surprise attacks. Campaign life involved many terrible choices. A curious rumour circulates through the resting soldiers while snowflakes drift across the clearing. Somebody claims troops near the Danube frontier once stuffed rabbit fur beneath shoulder armour during severe cold. Another insists certain officers wore silk underlayers because silk supposedly trapped warmth better than wool. Whether these stories reflect genuine practice or campfire exaggeration remains uncertain. Roman soldiers loved complaining about officers almost as much as they loved heated wine. You stretch aching shoulders carefully while staring into the flames. Tiny droplets of melted snow hiss against your armour edges. For a moment, warmth returns. Then the wind changes again. Instantly cold, it slips beneath your cloak and wraps around the metal covering your chest like icy fingers. You understand now why winter campaigns exhausted armies so completely. The environment never stops attacking you. Even resting requires effort. Several ancient military accounts hint indirectly at this problem. Commanders praise troops who maintain discipline during difficult winters because simply remaining functional in freezing conditions required extraordinary endurance. Not cinematic heroism, just stubborn persistence. Yet, the column begins moving again shortly afterward. You rise reluctantly, lifting the familiar weight of shield and pack once more. Snow crunches beneath hundreds of boots as the army disappears deeper into the forest. Afternoon light fades early beneath thick clouds overhead. Soon the world turns grey and silver around the marching legionaries. Armour dulls beneath frost and drifting snow. You glance down at your gloved hand resting against the edge of your breastplate. Cold, heavy, protective, miserable. Roman armour guarded soldiers from blades and arrows. Yes. But during winter campaigns, it also became another burden to manage carefully. Too little clothing beneath it invited sickness. Too much layering restricted movement during marches and battle. Finding balance mattered. As evening approaches, distant campfires finally appear between the trees ahead. Relief moves visibly through the column again. Soldiers straighten slightly despite exhaustion. Soon the armour can come off. Soon numb shoulders can rest. Soon cold iron will stop pressing against your skin for a few precious hours beside the fires of another snowy Roman night. The Rhine frontier does not feel like the edge of civilization. It feels like the edge of warmth. You arrive there beneath a sky all thick with grey winter fog while icy wind drifts across the riverbanks in slow-curling waves. Snow lies deep among the trees, broken only by narrow military roads and the dark outlines of watchtowers rising above the forest. Somewhere beyond the river waits Germania. Dark woods, scattered tribal villages, cold that never seems to end. You march beside the frontier palisades while your boots grind against frozen earth. The Rhine itself moves sluggishly nearby beneath sheets of floating ice. Every so often, chunks collide with hollow, cracking sounds that echo through the mist. The entire landscape feels ancient and watchful. Roman armies spent centuries stationed along these northern borders. Archaeological remains from forts, roads, and camps reveal how permanent military life became in this region. Thousands of soldiers rotated through these frozen frontiers over generations, building entire communities beside rivers most Italians would have considered horrifyingly cold. And honestly, they were correct. You pull your cloak tighter while the column approaches a timber fort rising above the snowy bank. Smoke curls from the chimneys inside the walls. Guards wrapped in heavy wool watch silently from the towers overhead. Even from outside, the place radiates relief. Warmth, shelter, routine. The gates creak open slowly. Inside, the fort buzzes with controlled winter activity. Soldiers carry firewood between barracks. Blacksmiths hammer metal inside smoky workshops. Horses stamp inside nearby stables while cooks empty steaming kettles into waiting bowls. The smell hits you immediately. Coal smoke, boiled grain, wet wool drying near fires, a little sewage too. Unfortunately, Roman engineering achieved many triumphs. Complete fragrance elimination was not among them. You pass rows of timber barracks darkened by years of spoken damp weather. Icicles hang from roof edges while stone piles against the walls. Yet compared to tents in open valleys, the fort feels almost luxurious. Almost. One revealing detail uncovered at frontier sites is how Roman forts evolved over time from temporary wooden camps into increasingly permanent stone complexes with baths, workshops, hospitals, and storage buildings. These northern garrisons became small military towns built specifically to survive harsh climates. Empire learns eventually. Usually after enough freezing soldiers complain, inside one courtyard, legionaries gather around braziers filled with glowing coals. Several hold hands above the heat while others dry gloves and socks beside the flames. One man appears to be thawing a completely frozen loaf of bread with intense concentration. Military life remains glamorous. You enter the assigned barracks with several other weary soldiers. Warm air greets you instantly, carrying the heavy smell of smoke, leather, and packed humanity. Rows of bunk spaces line the walls while gear hangs drying from wooden beams overhead. The room buzzes softly with conversation. Men discussing weather, road conditions. Rumours are full of tribal raids farther north. Complaints about food. Complaints about officers. Complaints about weather again. A tiny glimpse into the ancient soul. You remove your cloak slowly while heat from the central brazier begins restoring feeling to your face. Nearby, a veteran warns you never to sleep directly beside exterior walls during severe cold. Moisture gathered there overnight, soaking blankets and clothing by dawn. Practical wisdom passed quietly between generations of soldiers. One unusual little discovery from excavations near the Rhine involved fragments of fur and heavy textile layers not traditionally associated with standard Roman uniforms. Some experts suspect frontier troops modified official equipment heavily during winter months, prioritizing survival over appearance. Reasonable. Nobody wants to freeze elegantly. Outside, fog thickens across the riverbanks while evening patrols prepare to leave the fort. You watch them through the doorway for a moment, cloaked figures disappearing into white mist with spears and lanterns. Night watches along the Rhine must have felt endless. The frontier itself carried constant tension. Roman troops guarded against raids, smuggling, uprisings, and sudden attacks while enduring brutal weather month after month. Winter did not pause military responsibilities. If anything, cold weather made frontier duty more exhausting. Some researchers continue debating how effectively Roman commanders adapted their patrol schedules during severe winters. Frozen rivers occasionally created new dangers by allowing easier crossings for raiders. At the same time, blizzards and ice slowed communication badly between forts. Nature complicated strategy constantly. You settle beside the brazier while another soldier pours heated wine into clay cups. The liquid smells sharply of herbs and sour grapes. Not pleasant exactly, but deeply warming. Outside the barracks windows, snowdrift lazily across the courtyard. Inside, boots dry beside the fire. A younger recruit nearby asks whether anyone ever became accustomed to Rhine winters. Several veterans laugh immediately. One man finally answers, "You stop being surprised by misery, that is different." Fair point. An odd story circulates around the brazier before supper. Apparently one isolated watchtower farther north kept trained ravens that supposedly warned guards about approaching strangers during snowstorms. Whether true or not, the image feels strangely believable in this frozen landscape. You imagine black birds perched above silent forests while Roman sentries stamp numb feet beneath tower fires. The Empire always balanced between discipline and superstition. Supper arrives eventually in thick wooden bowls. Stew tonight, better than usual too. Bits of pork float among barley and onions while steam rises warmly into the crowded barracks. Men eat slowly beside the fire while snow taps softly against the roof outside. For the first time in days, your body begins relaxing properly. No wind clawing through tents. No frozen marches beneath open skies. Just timber walls, firelight, and warmth spreading gradually through tired muscles. Yet even here, along the fortified frontier, winter remains present. You hear it in the wind outside the walls. See it in the frost creeping along window edges. Feel it lingering inside your boots drying near the brazier. The Roman frontier never truly defeats the cold. It simply survives beside it. The bathhouse appears through the snow like a miracle. After days along the frozen frontier roads, your entire body feels stiff with cold and smoke and endless marching. Even your cloak smells exhausted. So when the fort commander announces access to the baths before nightfall, the mood across the barracks changes instantly. Men actually smile. A rare military event. You follow the crowd through the fort courtyard beneath drifting snow while warm steam curls upward from low-tile buildings ahead. The closer you get, the stronger the scent becomes. Hot water. Olive oil. Wood smoke. Humanity attempting civilization. Roman bathhouses existed throughout the empire, including frontier forts far from Italy itself. Excavations along the Rhine and in Britain reveal surprisingly sophisticated bathing systems complete with heated floors, warm pools, and furnace rooms. Even stationed beside icy forests, Roman soldiers expected access to baths whenever possible. The empire may invade your homeland, but it absolutely insists on plumbing. You enter through heavy wooden doors into blessed warmth. The temperature change feels shocking. Your cheeks sting immediately while frozen fingers begin thawing beneath your gloves. Around you, tired legionaries remove cloaks and boots with groans of relief. Steam drifts through the chamber in pale clouds. Lantern light glows softly against damp stone walls. Water echoes gently somewhere deeper inside the complex. For the first time in weeks, winter loosens its grip slightly. You move carefully across heated floors while soldiers crowd around benches scraping mud from sandals and unclasping armor straps. The room buzzes with conversation now that nobody's teeth are chattering constantly. One older legionary stretches his back dramatically and announces that he intends to remain inside the baths until spring. Several others agree this is an excellent strategy. Records from Roman military settlements suggest bathhouses serve purposes beyond hygiene alone. They functioned as social spaces, recovery centres, and psychological relief after difficult campaigns. Warmth itself became medicine in cold provinces. You understand completely. A slave attendant pours warm water across your hands, and honestly, you nearly become emotional. The sensation feels unreal after so many frozen marches. You remove your tunic slowly while steam wraps around your shoulders. Nearby, soldiers laugh quietly at one recruit whose skin has turned nearly purple from cold exposure. Somebody hands him heated wine immediately. The bath chambers ahead glow through curtains of steam. Warm pools ripple softly beneath arched ceilings, blackened by smoke over years of use. Legionaries sink gratefully into the water, with sighs so dramatic they sound theatrical. Yet once you lower yourself into the heated bath, you realize every sigh was justified. Warmth engulfs your body instantly. Your shoulders loosen. Your legs stop aching. The cold finally leaves your bones one careful inch at a time. You close your eyes briefly while voices echo gently around the chamber. Water splashes softly nearby. Somebody hums under his breath. Another soldier is already asleep against the pool edge with a towel draped across his face. A surviving frontier letter once mentioned soldiers complaining bitterly whenever bath furnaces failed during winter months. Considering the climate, this reaction feels extremely understandable. A broken bath system near the Rhine probably caused more despair than minor enemy raids. You lean deeper into the water while steam gathers along the ceiling overhead. Around you, scarred veterans scrub away layers of smoke and grime accumulated during weeks on campaign. Some use olive oil and scraping tools called strigils to clean the skin. The process looks vaguely uncomfortable, though Roman culture considered it perfectly normal. Dirt and sweat mixed with oil were scraped away using curved metal blades. Human beings truly invent fascinating routines. One soldier claims regular bathing helped prevent winter illness among frontier troops. Another insists the baths simply made everyone temporarily forget how miserable the weather remained outside. Modern researchers continue debating how sanitary Roman bathhouses actually were by contemporary standards. Shared water and crowded facilities likely spread certain illnesses even while improving cleanliness overall. Ancient people did not entirely grasp germ theory, unfortunately. Still, compared to freezing beside muddy roads, the baths feel magnificent. You eventually move into a hotter chamber, where thick steam clouds the air almost completely. Sweat forms across your skin immediately. Several soldiers lie stretched across stone benches looking half melted with relaxation. Outside, snow continues falling over the fort. Inside, warm air hums softly through the chamber. The contrast feels dreamlike. One strange little story told among frontier troops involves soldiers sneaking heated stones wrapped in cloth back to the barracks after visiting baths. Apparently, these improvised bed warmers remained popular during brutal winters, despite occasional accidents involving scorched blankets. Reasonable risk? Golly. Honestly. You linger beside the heated pools longer than intended. Everyone does. Nobody wants to step back into the freezing courtyard afterward. Eventually, though, the attendants begin urging soldiers toward the exit so the next groups can enter. Reluctantly, you dry yourself beside the warm walls and pull fresh clothing over newly heated skin. The sensation of clean wool after days of smoke and sweat feels astonishingly luxurious. A simple clean tunic becomes a treasure out here. When you finally step back outside, cold air strikes your face sharply once more. Yet this time the chill feels softer somehow, more distant. Lanterns glow across the snowy fort while smoke rises peacefully from chimneys overhead. Soldiers leaving the bathhouse walk slower now, calmer, wrapped in warmth, lingering beneath their cloaks, and you notice laughter more often tonight. Better posture, too. 2. Even the guards along the walls seem slightly less miserable. The Roman army fought battles with swords and shields, certainly, but moments like these mattered as well. Hot water, warm stone floors, steam drifting upward while snow fell silently outside. Tiny islands of comfort at the edge of a frozen empire. And tonight, for the first time in many days, you almost feel human again. The fur traders arrive just before dusk. You first notice them through the fort gates as dark shapes moving slowly behind mule carts loaded with bundled pelts. Snow drifts around their boots while guards inspect the wagons carefully beneath torchlight. These traders speak in rough accents unfamiliar to your ears, somewhere between local dialects and broken Latin. Every soldier in the courtyard suddenly pays attention, because winter changes the value of things. Gold matters, food matters, but warm fur becomes almost magical. You stand near the barracks entrance watching the newcomers unload thick animal skins from the carts. Wolf pelts, deer hides, beaver fur, heavy brown bundles tied with leather cords and dusted white with snow. The smell reaches you quickly. Wet fur, smoke, cold forest air. One trader lifts a massive bear skin from the wagon, and several legionaries immediately drift closer like hungry cats. Military records from northern provinces suggest Roman troops regularly traded with frontier communities for cold weather supplies unavailable through official channels. Local knowledge mattered enormously in harsh climates. Soldiers stationed near the empire's edges often adapted by purchasing regional clothing and survival equipment. Rome conquered territories, then quietly copied their winter gear. You cannot blame them. A veteran beside you fingers the edge of a thick wolf pelt with visible longing. His standard wool cloak has developed several holes already, and everyone knows the deepest winter months have not even arrived yet. One frontier officer begins bargaining loudly with the traders near the carts. Coins clink softly while torchlight flickers across fur and falling snow. Nearby soldiers pretend not to stare directly at the negotiations. They fail completely. A surviving account from a northern garrison mentions officers authorizing extra clothing purchases during unusually severe winters. Standard equipment sometimes proved insufficient in extreme conditions, especially for troops transferred from warmer regions who had absolutely no idea what awaited them near the Rhine or Danube. You imagine some poor recruit from southern Italy arriving here in thin Mediterranean clothing and immediately reconsidering every life decision. The traders themselves look remarkably comfortable. Heavy fur caps, layered skins, thick boots lined with the hair. Not stylish by Roman standards perhaps, but nobody currently freezing inside worn sandals feels qualified to criticize fashion choices. One of the men holds up fur-lined gloves while explaining something rapidly to a centurion. You catch only fragments of the conversation. Better for river patrols. Warmer than wool. Last through 2 winters. The centurion buys 3 pairs instantly. Smart man. Inside the fort courtyard, soldiers gradually cluster around the wagons examining the goods. Some trade coins, others barter bits of wine, spare tools, or polished buckles. The entire scene feels oddly peaceful for a military outpost guarding the edge of empire. Cold weather encourages cooperation in strange ways. One strange little rumour circulates among the troops tonight. Apparently certain Germanic hunters rubbed animal fat into fur cloaks to make them more resistant to snow and moisture. Whether the method worked properly remains uncertain, though several legionaries listening nearby seem eager to try absolutely anything at this point. Your standards for sensible ideas continue declining steadily. Researchers still discuss how deeply Roman frontier culture blended with local traditions over time. Despite official attitudes emphasizing Roman superiority, daily survival encouraged practical borrowing. Soldiers stationed for decades in northern provinces likely adopted local habits far more than surviving texts openly admit. Empires always change at the edges. You eventually purchase a narrow strip of rabbit fur from one of the traders, after discovering it wraps surprisingly well around the neck beneath your cloak. Soft warmth immediately settles against your skin, possibly the best decision you have made all campaigns. Nearby, another legionary proudly displays newly purchased fur bootliners while his friends react with pure jealousy. One threatens to steal them during the night. The owner responds by sleeping with the boots beside her pillow. Reasonable precaution. Snow continues drifting through the torchlit courtyard while trade carries on into evening. The fur merchants speak quietly beside their wagons while soldiers warm hands over braziers and inspect winter gear with exhausted seriousness. No one buys decorative luxuries tonight. Only warmth, only survival. One practical detail uncovered through archaeology involves the growing use of trousers among Roman soldiers stationed in colder climates. Traditional Roman fashion often favoured tunics, but northern winters encouraged more layered leg coverings over time. Some conservative writers complained bitterly about such barbarian influences. Easy to criticise trousers from sunny Italy, much harder while standing beside a frozen river at midnight. You adjust your new fur collar while wind sweeps across the fort walls outside. The soft lining traps warmth wonderfully beneath your cloak, Around the courtyard, many soldiers now wear mismatched combinations of Roman equipment and frontier clothing. Mail armour with fur caps, military cloaks over animal skins, standard sandals paired with wool wrappings and hideliners. The empire adapts piece by piece. One elderly trader near the gate points toward the dark forest beyond the river, while telling stories about deeper northern winters, snow taller than horses, rivers frozen solid for months, hunters disappearing into the blizzards without leaving tracks. Several recruits listening nearby look genuinely alarmed. A veteran simply shrugs and says, "Sounds colder." Fair summary. As darkness thickens across the fort, the traders prepare to leave before the roads worsen overnight. Guards swing open the gates while mule carts creak slowly back into the snowy wilderness beyond the walls. You watch the torchlights fade gradually among the trees. Then the gates close again with a heavy wooden thud. Inside the fort, legionaries return toward the barracks wrapped in newly purchased furs and thicker winter gear. Fires crackle softly across the courtyard while snow settles over rooftops and walls. Tonight, the Roman army feels slightly warmer. Not because of imperial engineering, not because of military discipline, but because strangers from beyond the frontier understood winter better than Rome ever truly could. The night watch begins in complete silence. Snow falls softly beyond the fort walls while the rest of the barracks settles toward uneasy sleep. Fires burn low in the courtyards now, reduced to glowing embers beneath drifting ash. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse stamps against frozen ground. You pull your cloak tighter and climb the wooden steps toward the wall tower. The cold hits immediately. Inside the barracks, warmth lingered from crowded bodies and brazier fires. Up here, the wind sweeps freely across the frontier. It slips beneath your cloak and crawls down your spine with patient determination. The guard beside you grunts sympathetically. "Worst hours before dawn," he says, comforting as always. You take your place along the wall overlooking the snowy wilderness beyond the Rhine. The river glimmers faintly beneath moonlight and drifting fog. Chunks of ice drift slowly downstream with hollow scraping sounds. Everything else feels still. Too still. Still. Military schedules recovered from Roman frontier sites show how carefully watch duties were organised. Guards rotated through shifts day and night regardless of weather conditions. Winter did not excuse vigilance. If anything, frozen rivers and long darkness often increased anxiety along the border. You understand that anxiety now. Beyond the walls stretches an endless landscape of dark trees and white ground. The snow muffles sound so thoroughly that every tiny noise feels amplified. A snapping branch, a distant howl, the scrape of your own boot against wood. Your imagination starts building disasters immediately. The wind sharpens again across the tower. You tuck gloved hands beneath your cloak while shifting weight from one foot to the other. Standing still becomes painful surprisingly quickly in this weather. No wonder guards constantly moved. Beside you, another sentry quietly drinks from a small flask hidden beneath his cloak. Heated wine, perhaps, or something stronger. You pretend not to notice. A lesser-known detail from Roman military life involves the punishments attached to sleeping during watch duty. Discipline remained brutally strict because entire camps depended on alert guards. Yet one suspects winter nights tested human endurance severely. Warm barracks nearby, endless darkness outside, snow drifting peacefully while exhaustion settles into your bones. Staying awake probably felt heroic by itself. You pace slowly along the wall. Crunch. Crunch. Snow squeaks beneath your boots while your breath rises in pale clouds before your face. The torchlight behind you flickers softly across timber and stone. Far below in the courtyard, a patrol crosses between the barracks carrying lanterns. Their light sways gently through the snowfall before disappearing again behind storage buildings. The frontier fort seems asleep, but never entirely asleep. One strange tale recorded in in later Roman writings describes guards along isolated northern towers singing quietly to themselves during long winter watches. Apparently the sound helped prevent drowsiness and eased fear during storms. Whether true or exaggerated, the image feels believable beneath this endless dark sky. Cold nights make human voices comforting, even terrible singing. You glance again toward the forests beyond the river. Snow continues falling between the trees in silver curtains beneath moonlight. Somewhere out there lie scattered villages, hunting paths, and unknown travellers moving through the frozen landscape. The empire ends at these walls. Beyond them waits uncertainty. Some historians continue debating how dangerous frontier patrols truly became during winter compared to warmer seasons. Heavy snow complicated raids and travel, certainly, but frozen rivers sometimes opened entirely new routes across natural barriers. Roman commanders had reason to remain cautious. Nature constantly rearranged the battlefield. A gust of wind sweeps across the tower carrying the smell of smoke from the fort fires below. Warmth suddenly feels impossibly distant. You stamp your feet harder now to keep circulation moving. The guard beside you notices. "Do not stop moving," he mutters. Cold catches lazy men first. Simple wisdom. You continue pacing. The minutes stretch strangely during night watches. Time slows beneath snowfall and darkness until every small detail grows vivid. Icicles hanging from shield edges, frost collecting along your eyelashes, the rhythmic creak of leather straps when you turn, the faint warmth trapped inside your gloves. Somewhere below, a mule begins braying loudly enough to wake half the fort. Several curses drift upward from nearby barracks windows. Apparently even Roman military animals hated night duty. You smile despite yourself. Archaeologists working along frontier sites uncovered evidence of small warming braziers positioned near certain watch posts during colder months. Guards likely rotated between exposed walls and sheltered stations whenever conditions became severe. Even disciplined armies understood practical limits. Though probably not generous limits, a thin layer of snow has gathered across your shoulders now. You brush it away absently while staring into the white darkness beyond the river. The landscape appears almost peaceful from here. That is the dangerous thing about winter nights. They can look beautiful while quietly trying to freeze you to death. One veteran once told you the cold works patiently. No sudden attacks, no dramatic charge. It simply drains strength little by little until exhausted people stop noticing danger. You think about that now while flexing numb fingers inside your gloves. The watch finally changes sometime near dawn. Relief arrives as a fresh pair of guards climbs the tower stairs wrapped in thick cloaks and carrying lanterns. Their faces already look miserable. You wish them luck anyway. Descending from the wall feels wonderful. Even the slight shelter between buildings blocks enough wind to matter. Snow crunches beneath your boots while pale dawn slowly touches the eastern horizon beyond the forests. The fort begins waking gradually, smoke rising from kitchen, doors opening, coughing soldiers emerging into the cold. Another winter morning along the frontier. You pause briefly before entering the barracks again and glance once more toward the silent snowy river beyond the walls. For hours, you stood guard against darkness and cold and unseen dangers hidden beyond the trees, and somehow the Empire survived until dawn again. The river crossing begins before sunrise. You stand among a long column of soldiers gathered beside dark water choked with drifting ice, while fog curls low across the banks. The air smells sharp and metallic, somewhere upstream. Cracking ice echoes through the grey morning, like distant tree trunks snapping in a storm. Nobody looks excited. That is usually a bad sign in military life. The Rhine itself moves slowly today, thick with floating shards of white ice turning lazily in the current. Snow rests along both riverbanks in uneven drifts while engineers shout orders beside a temporary crossing point. You tighten your cloak instinctively. Cold water frightens soldiers differently than cold air. Cold air attacks gradually. Frozen rivers attack all at once. The army needs to cross before heavier ice blocks movement entirely, so there is little choice. Supply wagons already line the road behind you while mules snort clouds of steam into the dawn darkness. Several soldiers nearby stare at the river with deeply unhappy expressions. Reasonable reaction. Ancient military accounts mention winter river crossings with particular dread, especially in northern campaigns. Heavy equipment, freezing currents, and unstable footing turned ordinary crossings into dangerous ordeals long before enemy forces appeared. Nature remained perfectly capable of defeating armies by itself. You move forward slowly with the column while engineers guide troops toward a narrow section where wooden supports and rope lines stabilize the crossing. Ice drifts against the timbers with hollow knocking sounds. Clunk, crack, clunk. The noise alone feels unsettling. A veteran beside you mutters that rivers in winter steal heat faster than thieves steal coins. Poetic and alarming. You reach the waterline at last. Instantly the cold intensifies. Wind sweeping off the river cuts through your cloak while fog dampens your face and gloves. Nearby soldiers test the footing nervously before stepping into the current. Then your turn arrives. The first touch of icy water against your boots feels shocking even through leather wrappings and wool. You suck in a breath immediately while gripping your shield tighter. Every instinct in your body objects. The current pushes hard against your legs as you move deeper beside the rope guides. Ice fragments drift past your knees. Water seeps slowly into your boots despite every effort to avoid it. Ahead, one mule slips sideways briefly, nearly toppling a supply cart into the river. Several soldiers grab the harness immediately while officers begin shouting loud enough to wake the entire frontier. The mule somehow recovers. He exhales together. A surviving military letter from Britain describes soldiers drying clothing for hours after river patrols during winter months. Even brief exposure to freezing water caused lingering misery once troops stopped moving. Dampness followed them back into tents, barracks, and blankets. Cold rivers haunted entire evenings afterward. You continue inching forward through the current while your legs gradually lose feeling. Around you, hundreds of soldiers move in careful silence broken only by splashing water and creaking ropes. Nobody jokes now. Nobody complains. The river demands concentration. One curious frontier rumour claimed experienced scouts rubbed goose fat onto exposed skin before icy crossings. Some believed it slowed heat loss or protected against freezing winds afterward. Whether genuinely effective or simply comforting remains uncertain, though desperate soldiers have always trusted unusual remedies. You suspect warm, dry socks would still outperform magic goose grease. The far bank finally approaches through the fog. Relief spreads visibly through the column. Soldiers climb onto snowy ground with stiff movements while attendants direct them toward waiting fires already crackling beside the shore. Steam rises immediately from soaked boots and dripping cloaks. You stumble toward the nearest flames with everyone else. The heat hurts at first. Painfully, your feet throb as circulation returns while smoke swirls through the damp morning air. Nearby legionaries strip off soaked wrappings and hold numb hands toward the blaze, with expressions approaching religious devotion. One man curses continuously for almost a full minute without repeating himself once. Honestly impressive. Archaeological evidence from frontier forts suggests Roman armies maintained stockpiles of spare footwear and textiles whenever possible near major crossing points. Wet gear became a recurring military problem during northern winters, especially around rivers and marshlands. Dry clothing could become strategic equipment. You remove one boot carefully. Water pours out. Wonderful. The soldier beside you laughs weakly and says, "At least your foot came with it." Morale remains surprisingly healthy considering the circumstances. Farther down the bank, several men gather around another fire drying shields and cloaks beside hanging kettles. The entire shoreline now smells of wet wool, river mud, horiuk, and overheated leather. A deeply Roman fragrance. The crossing continues for hours behind you. More soldiers, more wagons, more animals dragged reluctantly through freezing currents, while ice drifts past beneath grey skies. Some historians believe winter crossings shaped campaign decisions more heavily than ancient commanders admitted in official writings. Rivers controlled movement, supply lines, and survival itself during cold seasons. One badly timed crossing could exhaust troops before battle even began. Looking around at the half-frozen soldiers surrounding the fires, you believe it immediately. The cold settles deep after river crossing. Not dramatic, just lingering. Your legs continue aching long after drying beside the flames, even wrapped in fresh wool. You still feel the river somehow clinging to your skin. One old cavalryman nearby claims he can still remember crossings from 20 years earlier, simply because his bones begin hurting whenever snow falls. The younger recruits laugh politely. The veterans do not. Eventually the army reforms beyond the riverbank while smoke rises behind the crossing site. The column looks rougher now. Damp cloaks, muddy boots, red faces stung by cold wind. Yet still moving. Always moving! You take one final glance back toward the river before marching onward. Ice drifts slowly through grey fog while fires flicker along the snowy shore. Tiny figures continue wading through freezing water, carrying shields and standards into the northern wilderness beyond. The Roman army survives another winter crossing, barely warmer, considerably wetter, and entirely aware that rivers can sometimes feel more dangerous than war itself. By the time you reach the medical tent, your fingers barely bend properly. The cold from yesterday's river crossing still lingers inside your body despite dry clothing and hot broth the night before. Around the camp, many soldiers move stiffly now, flexing hands beside fires or limping carefully through snowpack pathways. Winter injuries rarely look dramatic at first. That is part of the danger. You duck beneath the flap of the medical shelter and immediately smell vinegar, smoke, damp wool, and crushed herbs. Warm air hangs thick inside the tent while lanterns flicker softly against rows of wooden benches. Several soldiers already sit waiting. One rubs pale fingers anxiously. Another keeps his boots removed while examining swollen toes. A third simply sleeps wrapped in blankets near a brazier, looking too exhausted to care about anything at all. Roman military medicine was more organized than many people realize. Frontier forts often included trained medics, surgical tools, herbal remedies, and designated treatment spaces for injured troops. The Empire invested heavily in keeping soldiers functional because replacing experienced men proved expensive. Empires run on logistics, and logistics include frostbitten feet. You settle near the brazier while a medic moves between patients carrying a bowl of steaming water. He wears heavy wool layered beneath a stained apron, and his hands look permanently cracked from cold weather. No glamorous marble physician here. Just a tired, practical man trying to stop soldiers from falling apart. A nearby legionary unwraps cloth from his hands, revealing fingers red and swollen from exposure. The medic clicks his tongue immediately and begins rubbing warm oil gently across the skin. Slow warming, he mutters, not fire. Apparently veterans learn this lesson repeatedly. One surviving medical text from the Roman world warns against shocking frozen limbs with intense heat too quickly. Ancient physicians may not have fully understood circulation scientifically, but practical experience taught them that gradual warming reduced agony and damage. Human beings learn efficiently after enough painful mistakes. The medical tent remained surprisingly quiet overall. Outside, the camp bustles with hammering and marching and shouting. Inside, voices stay softer somehow. The atmosphere feels careful, tired, concentrated. You extend stiff fingers toward the brazier, while another patient nearby complains about numb feet. The medic listens patiently before examining the toes with practiced calm. No blackening yet, he says. A sentence nobody wants to hear directed at their own body. Researchers examining Roman military healthcare continue debating how effectively frontier doctors handled cold weather injuries specifically. Ancient writers described wounds and fevers extensively, but frostbite and exposure appear less clearly in surviving texts. Practical treatment almost certainly existed even if official records remained incomplete. After all, northern winters were impossible to ignore. A curious little remedy appears in one later account involving heated wine mixed with herbs and garlic for soldiers suffering after severe cold exposure. Whether medically useful or simply comforting remains unclear. Roman medicine frequently blurred the line between science and optimism. The empire truly believed garlic could solve astonishing numbers of problems. You watch the medic move toward another patient whose cheeks have turned pale and waxy from wind exposure. He applies oil carefully while ordering the man closer to the brazier. Around the tent or tinin, steam rises from damp gloves and socks drying near the heat. Snow melts slowly from cloaks hung along wooden poles overhead. The entire shelter carries the weary atmosphere of bodies recovering from weather rather than battle. Winter itself has become the enemy now. One older soldier near the entrance quietly describes a campaign farther north where several men lost toes after sleeping in wet boots during a blizzard. The younger recruits listening nearby grow visibly uncomfortable. The veteran shrugs. "Dry feet or fewer feet," he says. Remarkably persuasive slogan. Outside the tent flap, snow continues drifting across camp beneath a pale afternoon sky. Occasionally, cold wind slips inside, carrying sharp bursts of icy air before the entrance closes again. You suddenly realize how much the entire army revolves around preserving warmth. Fires, blankets, dry clothing, hot meals, medical care. Every system pushes against winter constantly. Archaeologists studying frontier forts uncovered evidence of heated hospital buildings in some larger Roman settlements. Sophisticated floor heating systems carried warm air beneath stone rooms, helping wounded or sick soldiers recover more effectively during harsh weather. Honestly, if Rome deserved an empire for anything, it may have been heated floors. The medic eventually examines your hands as well. He presses your fingers carefully, checking sensation while asking whether numbness fades near the fire. You answer honestly. "Good," he says, "pain means life." Roman bedside manner remains refreshingly direct. He rubs oil mixed with herbs into the cracked skin around your knuckles before wrapping your hands briefly in warm cloth. The relief feels immediate. Tiny comforts matter enormously during winter campaigns. A strange rumour circulates among patients while you wait near the brazier afterward. Apparently some frontier healers believed fox fur wrapped around frostbitten limbs helped restore warmth faster. Another soldier insists northern tribes brewed special pine needle teas against winter sickness. Nobody entirely agrees on which remedies work best, but everyone agrees cold weather creates endless opportunities for experimentation. The medical tent gradually empties as evening approaches. Soldiers return toward barracks carrying fresh bandages, herbal mixtures, or strict instructions to avoid further exposure. You suspect most will ignore those instructions within hours. Military campaigns rarely pause for perfect recovery. Before leaving, you glance once more around the shelter. Lantern light flickers across steaming bowls and folded blankets. The brazier glows softly near stacked medical tools. Outside, the frozen frontier waits patiently beyond the canvas walls. Yet inside this warm tent, tired soldiers regain feeling in numb fingers and damaged feet one careful moment at a time. Not glorious work, not celebrated in triumphal parades, still essential. Because even the mighty Roman army cannot conquer much if winter quietly freezes it apart from within. The wind along Hadrian's Wall never seems to stop. It sweeps endlessly across the northern hills of Britain carrying sleet, fog, snow, and a level of damp misery that settles directly into your bones. You arrive there after weeks of travel and immediately understand why soldiers stationed here developed permanent expressions of disappointment. The wall stretches across the landscape like a dark scar beneath grey skies. Stone towers rise at intervals above snowy slopes while narrow roads disappear west and east into mist. This is not the warm Mediterranean world Rome imagined for itself. This is cold sheep country. You march through the fort gates beneath fluttering banners stiff with frost. Snow gathers in the cracks between paving stones while smoke pours from chimneys all across the compound. The first thing you notice is the sound. Wind rattling wooden shutters, wind humming along stone walls, wind sneaking beneath cloaks and collars no matter how tightly you wrap them. The second thing you notice is that everyone stationed here looks tired of discussing the weather. Excavations along Hadrian's Wall reveal extensive barracks, workshops, bathhouses, and storage buildings designed to support long-term military occupation in harsh conditions. Soldiers stationed in Britain adapted to cold, damp climates, far different from Italy's sunshine. Some probably missed olive groves with painful intensity. You enter one of the stone barracks beside several other legionaries while sleet taps sharply against the roof outside. Warmth from a central fire drifts through the room. Though the stone walls still feel cold enough to touch cautiously, Britain's cold differs from the dry freezing air farther east. This cold feels wet, persistent, sneaky. Your cloak never fully dries here. A veteran stationed along the wall notices your expression and laughs quietly. The damp reaches places inside your body you did not know existed, he says. A deeply inspiring welcome. You settle beside the fire while several soldiers repair boots under lantern light nearby. Others scrape mud from cloaks or warm hands around clay cups filled with steaming broth. Everything in Britain appears muddy. Even the snow somehow feels muddy. One particularly revealing discovery from frontier archaeology involved massive quantities of preserved shoes found near forts along the wall. The sheer number suggests footwear wore out rapidly in the harsh conditions. Soldiers marched constantly through wet ground, icy roads, and heavy rain. Roman military logistics probably spent half their time worrying about boots. Outside, sleet thickens against the fort walls. Guards crossing the courtyard hunch deeply beneath heavy cloaks while smoke whips sideways from the chimneys. The stone buildings help block some wind, but not enough. Cold drafts still creep through cracks and doorways. You feel them brushing against your ankles even now beside the fire. One surviving writing tablet from Roman Britain includes complaints about inadequate supplies and requests for warmer clothing. Ancient soldiers, it turns out, wrote letters home saying versions of this place is freezing. Some human experiences never change. A strange little local habit has apparently spread among certain frontier troops. Several soldiers wear extra strips of wool wrapped around their knees beneath tunics and trousers. One claims British dampness attacks the joints first. Another insists sleeping with heated stones beneath blankets prevents morning stiffness. Honestly, everyone on this wall seems engaged in ongoing negotiations with discomfort. You glance upward toward the barracks roof where smoke drifts lazily through dark wooden beams. Damp cloaks hang drying everywhere. Shields lean beside bunks. Wet boots line the hearthstones like loyal, exhausted dogs. The fort smells strongly of smoke, wool, wet leather, and peat fires. A very northern fragrance. Modern historians continue discussing how culturally mixed these frontier communities became over time. Soldiers stationed along Hadrian's Wall came from many parts of the empire, including Spain, Gaul, North Africa, and the Balkans. Men from sunny climates suddenly found themselves enduring British winters beside freezing hills. The empire moved people enormous distances. Imagine explaining snowstorms in northern Britain to someone recruited in warm southern provinces. Cruel surprise. As evening settles outside, the barracks grow warmer from crowded bodies and constant firewood feeding the hearth. Yet every time the door opens, icy air sweeps across the room hard enough to make everyone curse automatically. One recruit returning from latrine duty looks genuinely betrayed by the outdoors. The veterans barely racked anymore. That may be the final stage of frontier adaptation, emotional surrender. A curious rumour circulates through the barracks after supper. Apparently one remote outpost farther west trained local hunting dogs to sleep near sentries during severe winter nights, because the animals detected approaching strangers before humans could hear them through storms. Whether true or exaggerated, nobody dismisses the idea completely. Out here, Practical solutions matter more than Roman pride. You eat thick barley stew while sleet rattles steadily outside. The fire crackles warmly beside the room's centre, while tired soldiers exchange stories about collapsed roads, flooded ditches, and patrols vanishing into fog. Not many heroic speeches. Mostly weather complaints. A practical truth emerges quickly along Hadrian's Wall. The climate itself becomes part of military duty. Cold, wind, and dampness shape routines constantly. How you sleep, how you march, how you dry clothing, how long your boots survive, how close you sit to the fire at night. The wall guards the empire physically, yes, but the soldiers guarding it spend enormous energy simply staying warm enough to continue functioning. Later, before sleep, you step briefly outside into the courtyard. Snow and sleet drift sideways beneath torchlight, while the massive stone wall fades into darkness beyond the fort. Wind hums along the battlements, carrying the smell of wet earth and distant peat smoke. Somewhere out there beyond the frontier lie frozen hills and unseen tribes moving through the night. Behind you, warm firelight glows softly through the barracks windows. You return inside immediately. Rome may have built walls across Britain, but tonight the real battle still happens against cold air sneaking beneath every doorway. The charm hangs from the soldier's neck beside his wolf-tooth necklace. You notice it while sitting near the barracks fire one bitter evening along the frontier. Outside, snow taps softly against the shutters, while wind hums across the wall towers. Inside, tired legionaries crowd close to the flames, repairing gear and warming stiff hands. The charm itself looks simple. A tiny bronze figure no larger than your thumb, worn smooth from years of handling. The soldier catches you staring and shrugs. "Keeps frost spirits away," he says casually. Nobody laughs. That surprises you at first. Rome prides itself on discipline, engineering, military organization, and practical thinking. Yet the longer you spend among frontier soldiers, the more you realize cold weather creates room for superstition remarkably quickly. Especially at night, you pull your cloak tighter while sparks drift upward from the hearth. Around the room, small personal charms appear everywhere once you begin noticing them. Tiny carved animals tied to belts, coins stitched into clothing, strange symbols scratched inside shields, necklaces made from teeth, bone, or polished stones. One soldier even keeps a tiny figurine of Mercury wrapped carefully in rabbit fur beside his bunk. Apparently the messenger god now specializes in winter survival. Material recovered from Roman military sites suggests personal amulets were extremely common among soldiers, despite official Roman religion focusing heavily on state rituals and military ceremonies. Individual beliefs blended together freely across the empire, especially in distant frontier regions where troops came from many cultures. A freezing fort beside the edge of Britain tends to encourage spiritual flexibility. The veteran across from you pokes the fire thoughtfully, before explaining that certain soldiers refuse to begin winter marches without touching specific lucky objects first. Some kiss coins, he says, others whisper prayers to river gods. Another man mutters that one centurion always carried dried garlic inside his armor for protection. Against evil spirits, perhaps? Or maybe against terrible stew. Hard to know. You sip heated wine slowly while listening to the storm outside strengthen. Snow scratches against the walls now in soft, restless waves. The entire barracks feels smaller during weather like this, closer, more intimate, and maybe a little more vulnerable. A curious inscription discovered near one northern frontier outpost appeared to combine Roman symbols with local protective markings against cold and darkness. Scholars continue puzzling over exactly what the carvings meant. Frontier communities often blended beliefs together naturally over time. Empires spread culture in both directions. One recruit nearby quietly ties a small leather pouch around his wrist before preparing for night watch. Another traces a symbol against the doorframe before stepping outside into the snow. You ask what is inside the pouch. "Fox fur," he answers immediately. "My mother swore it prevents freezing." "Does it work?" He shrugs. I still have fingers. Compelling evidence. The fire crackles softly between the soldiers while lantern light flickers across tired faces. Outside, the frozen world presses against the fort walls endlessly. It becomes easier to understand superstition in places like this. Cold strips away certainty. A storm arrives suddenly. A river freezes overnight. A man falls asleep too deeply near a patrol route and never wakes properly again. No wonder soldiers carried charms. Some ancient writers mocked frontier troops for adopting local rituals and strange protective habits during difficult campaigns. Yet those same writers usually described events from warm villas far away from the actual snow. Comfort encourages skepticism. Blizzards encourage negotiation with invisible forces. One odd little tradition circulates through the barracks tonight involving boots left facing the doorway before sleep. According to several veterans, this prevents wandering spirits from confusing soldiers during severe storms. Another man insists whistling during snowfall invites bad luck onto patrols. The room immediately becomes very quiet afterward. Apparently nobody wants to test the theory. Archaeological finds from military forts reveal tiny household shrines and personal devotional spaces tucked inside surprisingly ordinary areas. Soldiers prayed not only for victory in battle, but also for health, warmth, and safe travel and protection from illness. Practical concerns shape spiritual life constantly. You glance toward the far end of the barracks where a small oil lamp burns beside a wooden figure of Mithras placed carefully near the wall. A few soldiers occasionally leave bits of bread or wine there before difficult patrols. Nothing dramatic, just quiet habits. The storm outside worsens steadily as evening deepens. Wind rattles the shutters while smoke drifts lazily through the roof beams overhead. Somewhere beyond the walls, snow buries roads and watchtowers beneath darkness. The fort feels like a tiny island of warmth surrounded by endless winter. One older cavalryman tells a story about a patrol years earlier that survived a blizzard after following a raven through fog back toward campfires. Ever since then, he refuses to harm ravens under any circumstances. The younger soldiers debate whether the story actually happened. The cavalryman simply points toward a missing finger on his left hand and says, "Believe whichever part you like." Conversation ends quickly after that. You stare into the flames while the fire pops softly before you. Tiny glowing embers rise upward like drifting stars. Around the room, exhausted soldiers slowly prepare for sleep. Boots lined carefully beside beds, charms tucked beneath blankets, small prayers whispered quietly into cold dark corners. One practical reality becomes increasingly obvious during these long winters. Roman soldiers survive through discipline and engineering. Yes, but they also survive through routines, symbols, stories, and tiny rituals that made the frozen world feel slightly less frightening. Human beings need meaning almost as much as warmth. Eventually you settle beneath your blankets while the storm continues outside. The veteran near the fire wraps his bronze charm carefully back beneath his tunic before lying down. You still are not certain whether frost spirits exist, but somewhere beyond the walls, snow drifts endlessly across the frontier under a moonless sky. And tonight, even the most practical soldiers sleep a little easier, with lucky charms close to their hearts. The Emperor arrives during sleet. Not dramatically, unfortunately. No golden sunlight breaks through the clouds. No triumphant music echoes across the frontier. Instead, cold rain mixed with snow lashes the fort walls while exhausted soldiers stand in muddy formation trying not to shiver visibly. Still, excitement spreads through the camp immediately, because emperors rarely visit frozen edges of the empire unless something important is happening. You stand among rows of legionaries beside the main courtyard, while officers bark endless instructions about posture, discipline, and appearance. Cloaks have been brushed clean, armor polished as much as weather allows, fires hidden from sight so smoke does not drift across the reception route. The entire fort suddenly pretends winter is not miserable. An impossible task. Far beyond the gates, Horns finally sound through the grey afternoon. Cavalry escorts appear first, riding slowly through sleet while horses splash across muddy roads. Behind them come wagons, attendants, standard bearers, and finally the imperial party itself, wrapped in thick cloaks lined with expensive fur. You notice the fur immediately. Everyone notices the fur. Ancient sources frequently mention emperors touring frontier regions during military campaigns or inspections. These visits reinforced authority, boosted morale, and allowed rulers to observe conditions directly, at least in theory. The ordinary soldiers watching from freezing courtyards often formed more complicated opinions. The emperor dismounts beneath heavy umbrellas held by attendants while officers hurry forward bowing deeply. Rainwater drips steadily from helmets and banners all around the square. The emperor himself looks tired. Older than coins suggest. Still richly dressed though. A murmur passes quietly through the ranks when one soldier notices the imperial boots appear lined with thick white fur. Several legionaries immediately glance down at their own soaked footwear. Morale becomes complicated very quickly. You remain motionless while the inspection begins. Officers escort the emperor through the fort, pointing proudly toward barracks, workshops, walls, and storage buildings. Notably absent from the tour, the smell. No official inspection ever pauses dramatically beside muddy latrines or damp boot piles. One preserved account from a frontier campaign describes an emperor ordering extra firewood and winter clothing distributed after personally witnessing severe conditions among the troops. Whether motivated by compassion or military necessity remains open to interpretation. Cold soldiers fight poorly either way. As the procession moves deeper into the fort, sleet thickens overhead. Water trickles beneath your collar despite every attempt to stay dry. Nearby soldiers maintain rigid formation while quietly suffering together. One man sneezes loudly enough to terrify himself. An officer glares at him with the fury of 10 disappointed fathers. Eventually the emperor approaches your section of the courtyard. Up close, you notice details hidden from a distance. The fine stitching on the cloak, the heavy gloves, the attendants carrying heated drinks nearby, a faint smell of expensive oil drifting through the wet air. This is still military life, certainly, but a warmer version. Archaeological evidence from imperial residences and command compounds suggests high-ranking officials enjoyed considerably better insulation, heating, and supplies than ordinary troops. Stone rooms with advanced heating systems contrasted sharply with crowded barracks and exposed watch posts. Rank provided many privileges, including warmer feet. The emperor pauses briefly to speak with one grey-haired centurion standing near the front ranks. You cannot hear the entire conversation over the sleet, but one phrase drifts clearly across the courtyard. "How severe are the winters here?" The centurion answers immediately. "Severe enough, Caesar." Careful wording, honest without sounding disrespectful. The emperor nods thoughtfully before continuing onward through the fort. Once the procession disappears inside the command building, the soldiers finally relax formation. Instantly, everyone begins stamping numb feet and flexing frozen fingers. Several muttered comments about imperial fur boots spread quietly through the ranks. One soldier claims the emperor's gloves probably cost more than an entire year of his wages. Another argues the emperor looked cold too. The first soldier responds, "Yes, but cold beside a heated wagon." Fair distinction. A small but fascinating detail appears in certain frontier writings describing emperors adopting heavier northern clothing styles during campaigns. Traditional Roman fashion often gave way to practical survival needs remarkably fast. Once snowstorms entered the conversation, even rulers eventually surrender to wool trousers. The sleet finally weakens toward evening, leaving the fort soaked and grey beneath low clouds. Fires are relit across the courtyards, while cooks prepare larger suppers than usual in honour of the imperial visit. Nothing boosts morale like slightly improved stew. You sit beside the barracks fire later that night listening to soldiers discuss the emperor endlessly. Was he stern, tired, impressive, too soft, too old? One veteran shrugs and says all emperors look colder after a week on the frontier. Hard to argue with that. Somewhere nearby, musicians hired for the Imperial entourage play faintly through the storm. Soft flute music drifts across the fort mixed with the sounds of wind and crackling fires. An odd combination, luxury and hardship sharing the same frozen courtyard. Modern scholars still debate how much frontier inspections truly improved ordinary military life. Some likely resulted in practical reforms or supply increases. Others may have functioned mainly as political theatre performed for both soldiers and distant audiences in Rome. Either way, the troops received extra firewood tonight. Nobody complains about that part. Before sleep, you step briefly outside the barracks once more. The Emperor's standards hang motionless in the damp evening air while guards patrol carefully around the command building. Beyond the walls, snow still covers the frontier roads stretching into darkness. Inside the fort, ordinary soldiers warm themselves beside smoky fires while imperial attendants prepare heated chambers for their rulers. Different worlds, same winter, and the cold touches everyone eventually. No matter how much fur lines the cloak, the blizzard arrives without warning. One moment you march beneath light snowfall through rolling hills north of the frontier road. The next, the sky vanishes completely behind roaring white wind. Snow explodes across the landscape in thick spinning waves. Visibility collapses. The world becomes white noise and freezing air. You pull your cloak across your face instinctively while the marching column stumbles to a halt around you. Horses scream somewhere ahead. Officers shout orders immediately. But the wind tears voices apart before they travel more than a few steps. This is no ordinary snowfall now. This feels alive. You squint desperately through the storm, trying to see the standard ahead of your unit. Sometimes it appears briefly through the white haze. Sometimes it disappears entirely. That second possibility terrifies everyone. Roman armies relied heavily on formation, communication, and organized movement. Blizzards attacked all three at once. Ancient campaign records occasionally mention storms scattering units or delaying entire operations for days during severe winters. An army can defeat enemies more easily than confusion. Snow strikes your face sharply while the wind pushes sideways hard enough to stagger marching soldiers. Cloaks whip violently. Ice gathers across helmet rims and beard stubble within minutes. The cold changes too. Sharper now. Angrier. A veteran grabs your shoulder suddenly before you drift too far sideways from the line. "Stay close," he shouts. You nod immediately. People disappear in storms like this. The column attempts moving again, but progress slows into chaos. Wagons struggle through deepening snow while mules panic at shapes they cannot properly see. Somewhere behind you, a wheel snaps with a loud crack. The sound vanishes instantly into the blizzard. One account from a northern campaign described soldiers tying themselves together with ropes during severe winter marches to prevent separation in snowstorms. Historians continued discussing how widespread such methods actually were, though the idea feels increasingly sensible right now. You can barely see your own boots. The road itself disappears beneath drifting snow. Officers attempt guiding the column by terrain memory and scattered landmarks, but the landscape transforms rapidly under the storm. Hills vanish. Trees blur into ghostly shadows. Even sound behaves strangely. Voices emerge suddenly nearby, then vanish completely. Metal clinks from invisible soldiers. The wind moans endlessly through the white darkness. You keep marching because stopping feels dangerous. Movement means warmth. Movement means survival. A frightened mule suddenly bolts sideways through the storm, dragging broken harness straps behind it. Several soldiers leap clear while curses vanish into the roaring wind. Somewhere ahead, horns attempt signaling directions. You hear only fragments. This is how armies become lost. Not always through battle, sometimes simply through weather powerful enough to erase the world. Archaeological studies of frontier regions suggest winter logistics often determined campaign success more than combat itself. Roads vanished under snow, supplies froze, communication failed, armies exhausted themselves simply staying alive long enough to reach spring. Nature remained Rome's oldest enemy. Snow piles heavily across your shoulders now. You brush it away repeatedly while forcing numb legs onward through deep drifts. Beside you, another soldier mutters prayers continuously beneath his breath. No one mocks him. The storm has removed all arrogance from the column. One eerie little tale preserved in later frontier storytelling described entire patrols wandering in circles during blizzards because blowing snow erased tracks instantly behind them. Survivors supposedly navigated by listening for distant river sounds beneath the wind. Whether entirely true or not, the story suddenly feels uncomfortably realistic. You cannot even tell where the sky ends anymore. Hours seem to pass inside the storm, or perhaps only minutes. Time loses meaning in blizzards. Eventually the marching column compresses tightly together for warmth and visibility. Shields overlap against the wind while soldiers grip each other's cloaks to avoid separation. The mighty Roman army now resembles exhausted travelers stumbling through a frozen nightmare. And honestly, that's exactly what you are. A centurion finally shouts new orders through cupped hands. The army will stop and form emergency shelter lines beside a rocky ridge partially blocking the wind. Relief spreads instantly. You half stumble, half slide toward the dark shapes emerging faintly through the snow ahead. Men immediately begin erecting partial windbreaks using shields, carts, branches, and whatever else remains available. Fire becomes the next challenge. Everything is wet. Everything shakes in sin. Yet soldiers still kneel desperately beside bundles of tinder, trying to coax some tiny flames into existence. One spark finally catches beneath an overturned shield. Then another. Small victories feel enormous in storms like this. Several men huddle around the weak flames immediately while others continue securing equipment against the gale. Horses are tied close together for warmth. Wagons form barriers against drifting snow. Practical survival overwhelms military ceremony completely. A Roman officer writing years later noted that experienced winter troops learned to fear exposure more than enemy spears during northern campaigns. Looking around now at the exhausted snow-covered soldiers crouched beside flickering fires, you understand the sentiment entirely. The storm continues screaming overhead long after darkness falls. Inside the emergency camp, shadows huddle close around tiny fires protected from the wind by shields and bodies. Steam rises faintly from damp cloaks. Ice crusts along helmets and eyebrows. Nobody sleeps deeply. The blizzard never allows it. You sit wrapped in blankets beside glowing embers while snow whirls endlessly beyond the shelter line. Occasionally the wind weakens enough for distant sounds to emerge from the darkness. Coughing, shifting horses, muted prayers, the crackle of struggling firewood. Then the storm swallows everything again. Tomorrow the army will count missing supplies. Broken wagons, lost animals, perhaps lost men too. But tonight survival shrinks into something smaller and simpler. Stay close to the fire. Stay close to the others. Keep moving your fingers and wait for the storm to finally loosen its frozen grip on the Roman world. The oldest veteran in the fort sleeps closest to the fire. Nobody questions the arrangement anymore. You find him there most evenings, wrapped in layered wool blankets with one scarred hand stretched toward the embers. His beard has gone almost entirely white now, though his shoulders still carry the heavy shape of a soldier who spent decades beneath armor. Outside, snow falls quietly across the frontier roads. Inside, the old man tells stories. You settle beside the hearth after supper, while other legionaries drift gradually toward the warmth. Some repair harness straps, others polish helmets or quietly drink heated wine from clay cups. The barracks glows orange beneath firelight while winter presses softly against the walls beyond. The veteran stares into the flames for a while before speaking. You remember cold differently when you are old, he says. Nobody interrupts him. He begins describing a campaign near the Danube many winters earlier. Frozen marshes, endless fig, ice gathering across shields during night watches, men waking to discover water buckets frozen solid beside their beds. As he talks, the younger recruits lean closer, not because the stories are glorious, because they sound true. One fascinating aspect of Roman military life emerges repeatedly in surviving letters and records. Veterans carried memories of climate and hardship as strongly as memories of battles. Campaigns became attached to weather in the mind. Certain winters gained reputations lasting decades. You understand why. Cold leaves impressions deep inside the body. The veteran chuckles softly while recalling a patrol where 3 soldiers fought over a single dry blanket during a sleet storm. Another story follows about warming boots beside a fire, so aggressively that the leather shrank overnight. Apparently Roman military life included many tragic footwear incidents. Around the room, tired soldiers smile quietly. The old man pauses occasionally to warm stiff hands above the embers. Firelight flickers across the deep lines in his face while wind hums faintly beyond the shutters. He has survived enough winters that nobody doubts his authority anymore. A set of writing tablets discovered near frontier forts revealed soldiers frequently mentioning weather conditions in personal correspondence. Snow, mud, freezing rain, and bitter winds appeared constantly in daily complaints and observations. Military life depended upon enduring environments most Roman citizens never personally experienced. Empire looked different from the frontier. The veteran points toward your boots suddenly. Keep them dry, he says. Dry boots save lives. Simple advice, repeated endlessly across generations. He describes another winter farther north where supply delays forced troops to burn broken wagon parts for warmth. The camp eventually smelled of smoke, wet wool, and desperation for weeks. One younger soldier asked whether the veterans were frightened. The old man shrugged slowly. Mostly tired. That answer settles over the room quietly. A strange little memory surfaces next. He recalls certain soldiers sleeping with heated stones wrapped in spare tunics beneath their blankets during severe storms. One recruit apparently forgot his stone beside a wool cloak and nearly set half a barracks on fire. The veteran laughs properly this time. Several others join him. Even hardship becomes softer inside memory eventually. Researchers studying military communities along the frontiers often note how shared suffering strengthened group identity among troops. Endless marches, storms, shortages, and freezing nights created bonds difficult to replicate elsewhere. Cold weather became communal experience. Everyone remembers the same blizzard, the same flooded road, the same freezing river crossing. You listen while the veteran describes watching snowfall across silent forests during midnight patrols decades ago. He still remembers the sounds clearly. Harness chains moving through fog, ice cracking along river banks, the strange hush that comes before heavy snowfall. Certain memories remain sharp forever. The fire pops softly beside you while more soldiers drift towards sleep around the barracks. Cloaks hang drying near the hearthstones. Someone quietly sharpens a knife beneath lantern light. The old veteran lowers his voice further now. He admits the hardest part of winter campaigning was not always the cold itself. It was repetition. Another story. Another frozen. Frozen mere. Frozen morning. Another march through slush with numb feet and wet gloves. The endlessness wore men down. That observation feels deeply honest. Some scholars examining Roman military morale suggest long frontier postings likely exhausted soldiers psychologically as much as physically. Harsh climates, isolation, and monotonous duty cycles created slow grinding fatigue rarely celebrated in official histories. Triumphal monuments never mention damp socks. The veteran eventually describes his final campaign before retirement. By then, he says, he no longer feared snowstorms or frozen rivers. He feared losing warmth, a missing glove, a collapsed fire, wet bedding before nightfall. Tiny mistakes became dangerous after enough winters. The younger soldiers listen carefully now. No one jokes anymore. Outside, snow continues falling softly beyond the fort walls. The world feels deeply quiet tonight. Even the wind has calmed at last. The veteran leans closer toward the fire and stares into the glowing coals. "You know what I remember most?" he asks. Her body answers. "The warmth afterward. Not battles, not victories, just warmth returning after cold finally released its grip. A bathhouse after weeks on campaign." Dry boots beside a fire. Morning sunlight touching frozen hands. Human memory works strangely sometimes. You glance around the barracks now. Tired soldiers wrapped in wool. Steam rising faintly from drying clothes. Firelight reflecting softly against shields and helmets. And an old veteran speaking quietly about winters long vanished into history. The Empire stretches across continents outside these walls. But tonight, inside this warm barracks, the Roman world feels wonderfully small. Just soldiers, snow, stories, and the comforting crackle of a fire holding darkness back one more evening. The fire burns low beside the frontier road. After months of marching through frozen valleys, sleeping beside smoky campfires, and waking beneath endless grey skies, the campaign finally begins slowing into silence. Snow still covers the hills around you, but winter feels softer now somehow, familiar, almost companionable. You sit wrapped in a heavy wool cloak while the last light of evening fades behind distant forests. Around the camp, soldiers move more slowly tonight. No frantic preparation, no shouted marching orders, just quiet routines unfolding beneath drifting snow. A man hangs damp gloves beside glowing embers. Another brushes down a mule with patient hands. Someone farther away hums softly while stirring a kettle over the fire. The Roman army has learned how to survive this season, not conquer it. Survive it. That distinction matters. The camp itself feels smaller than before. More worn, perhaps. Shields carry scratches from ice and rough travel. Cloaks have been patched repeatedly. Boots show layers of repairs stitched together by cold, tired fingers during long nights beside the hearth. Yet everything still functions, barely sometimes, but enough. A surviving collection of military records hints at how much ordinary maintenance consumed frontier life. Repairing clothing, preserving food, drying gear, gathering firewood, and tending animals occupied enormous amounts of time during winter encampments. Armies survive through constant practical labour rather than dramatic heroics alone. Empire depended on small repetitive tasks. You stretch your hands toward the fire while sparks drift upward into the darkening sky. The warmth settles gently across your knuckles. Not painful anymore. Familiar. Across the camp, snowflakes swirl lazarily through lantern light. Horses breathe steam into the evening air, while guards patrol slowly between tents and wagons. Nobody rushes tonight. The veteran from the barracks sits nearby, wrapped in blankets, staring quietly into the flames. He no longer tells stories constantly. Some evenings he simply listens to the sounds around him. Crackling wood, soft voices, boots crunching through snow, the ordinary music of winter camps. One curious object catches your eye beside another soldier's bedroll, a small polished stone blackened on one side from years beside fires. The owner notices your glance and smiles faintly. Carried it through 3 campaigns, he says, still warm longer than anything else. Human beings become attached to strange things during hard winters. A handful of archaeologists studying Roman camps have remarked upon the number of repaired personal objects uncovered near frontier sites. Tiny items survived for years beyond their expected usefulness. Cups patched repeatedly, clothing restitched endlessly, broken tools reused creatively. Nothing wasted easily where warmth and survival mattered daily. The fire settles lower now while darkness thickens around the camp. Beyond the reach of the lanterns, snowy hills fade into soft shadow beneath a pale moon. You think back across the long winter, frozen rivers, wet boots, steam rising from bathhouses, blizzards swallowing entire roads, fur traders arriving through snow, the endless battle against cold air slipping beneath cloaks and through tent seams. At first, winter felt like an enemy attacking constantly from every direction. Now it feels more like a landscape you learn to move through carefully. A harsh teacher, perhaps, but no longer unfamiliar. Some historians believe prolonged frontier service changed Roman soldiers permanently even after they returned south. Men who survived northern winters carried different habits home with them, different clothing preferences, different endurance, different memories of what cold truly meant. You suspect the veteran near the fire still feels winter in his bones every year. The camp quiets steadily as night deepens. One by one, lanterns dim, conversations soften. Only the fires continue whispering steadily beneath the stars. You pull your cloak tighter and lean back against your pack. The wool smells faintly of smoke and snow and months of travel. A comforting scent now. Nearby, a soldier carefully removes his boots and places them close enough to the fire for warmth, but not so close that the leather cracks. Tiny routines like that have become instinctive across the camp. Warmth preserved carefully. Dryness protected fiercely. Nothing taken for granted anymore. A light wind brushes across the snowfield beyond the camp, carrying faint pine scents through the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, water moves quietly beneath river ice. The empire stretches far beyond this lonely frontier. Cities glow beneath warmer skies elsewhere. Markets bustle. Senators argue beneath marble ceilings. Citizens stroll dry streets in comfortable sandals, completely unaware of soldiers, sitting beside freezing roads trying to keep numb fingers alive through another winter. Yet perhaps this quiet camp matters just as much. Because empires survive through ordinary endurance more than grand speeches. The fire beside you collapses softly inward as another log settles into glowing embers. Orange light flickers gently across tired faces nearby. You realize something now. Roman soldiers stayed warm the same way people always have, by gathering close together, by sharing fires, by telling stories, by helping one another through storms and darkness and long frozen nights. No secret miracle, it's just wool cloaks, hot food, dry boots, patience, and human beings refusing to let the cold win completely. The snow continues falling softly beyond the camp while the final embers glow red against the dark. Your eyes grow heavy. The wind quiets. Somewhere nearby, a mule shifts gently in sleep, and beneath the endless winter sky at the edge of the Roman world, the fires burn lower and lower, until warmth and darkness finally drift together into silence. The night deepens softly around the sleeping camp now, and the last of the fire settles into glowing red embers beneath a pale blanket of ash. Snow continues falling in slow, gentle spirals through the dark, covering wagon tracks, footprints, and the rough scars left by the long winter campaign. Even the wind has grown quieter at last. You sit wrapped in heavy wool beside the fading warmth, listening to the small, peaceful sounds that remain. A horse breathing steadily in the distance, a faint clink of harness chains, a soft rustle of cloaks as tired soldiers sleep close together beneath blankets and furs. The frozen frontier no longer feels harsh tonight, only still. The great Roman roads stretch silently across forests and hills beyond the camp, disappearing into moonlit snowfields and forgotten valleys. Somewhere far away, rivers move beneath ice, watchtowers stand against the dark, and lonely fires continue glowing beside distant walls. But here, for this moment, everything rests. The soldiers rest. The animals rest. Even the storm clouds have drifted onward. Your boots are dry beside the fire. Your cloak holds warmth close around your shoulders. The cold remains outside, patient and endless, yet no longer frightening. Just part of the world. The embers dim slowly now, their orange light fading softer and softer against the snow. You feel the long marches finally slipping away into memory. The frozen rivers, the bitter winds, the crackling campfires beneath pine trees, the quiet voices sharing stories in the dark, all of it settling gently into silence. And as sleep begins to pull the heavy winter night around you at last, the Roman frontier fades softly into drifting snow, distant firelight, and the comforting warmth of one final peaceful breath beneath the stars. Sweet dreams.